Okay, recording is now enabled. Good, thank you. Because of the pandemic situation, this year's conference is entirely online, but we're hopeful that we'll be able to resume in-person meetings from next year. This afternoon, we're pleased to virtually welcome 5 keynote speakers across 4 presentations. All of the speakers are longtime associates and friends of our lab. The theme of the symposium is superposition, imagery, soundscapes, and rhythms. The first speaker will be Michael Frischkopf, University of Alberta, who uses ethnomusicology as a context for explicating polyrhythms, the superposition of multiple musical rhythms. The second speaker is Professor William Martins of the University of Sydney, who will describe seated virtual reality and augmented reality, including superposition of synthetic audio signals atop multiple naturally apprehended soundscapes. The third invited presentation features Yuka Hayashi and Rob Udendijk of YR Design, who describe their contributions to the Hyper Wiper project, which superimposes gyrations of a windshield wiper atop a musical dance track. And the final presentation by Jens Herder of the Hochschule Düsseldorf spans augmented reality for learning Japanese and an MR project. The format for all keynote presentations is the same, about 35 to 40 minutes, formal presentation, followed by about 5 or 10 minutes questions and answers, with a 5-minute interval between the presentations. I thank the speakers in advance for respecting this tight schedule. So I'm monitoring the Zoom chat, and I'm reminded by Debo that we have a breakout room where after the sessions, you can go in and discuss informally besides the Q&A of the formal presentations. Okay, so if there are no questions or problems, without further ado, I'll introduce our first speaker, Michael Aaron Frischkopf, professor at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Canada. The title of this presentation is African Polyrhythm. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks very much, Michael. Nice to see you all. I'm sorry it can't be in person, but we're all getting used to the Zoom kind of reality. Can you all hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, good. So I'll just share my presentation and then supposedly everything should work. I guess I need to share optimized for video clip, probably. No one's guiding me. Okay, I'll do that. Share. I clicked the wrong thing. Can everybody see the presentation?
Yes, we can, but we can see on your slide notes and so on. We are not seeing the main.
I don't know why it's doing that. Let me see if I can. Slideshow, play from start. Okay, does anybody know how to get rid of the?
Up on the panel, swap displays, that probably should work.
How is it now?
There we go. Now it's perfect.
Great. Thank you for the. Okay, I just tried a little bit in working this out. I'm going to try to stick within the allotted time. Michael, maybe you can, or somebody can give me a little cue. I'll put my watch out here. So it's now 10:07 here, 7 minutes past. I had a lot of material and then I realized it was a little shorter, so some of it will have to go. But I hope it will be enjoyable. It's a little bit maybe outside the normal scope of a technical session, but I hope you enjoy it. So there's 3 main questions I'm trying to address here. One is, what is polyrhythm? And related to that, what is polymeter? Some theory definitions, and I'm some experience also by playing examples. And then how can polyrhythm be represented visually is what I mean here. And I'll show several techniques for doing that. And how can polyrhythm be understood, especially culturally? And at that point, I'll sort of take the line that we can't remain at a technical level, but we have to move outwards to a broader cultural context, which is the basic stance of my discipline, ethnomusicology. So here's the plan. First, I'll have a kind of this technical explication of polyrhythm, giving definitions, giving you some examples, some representations, and then point to the danger of reducing music simply rhythm. And from there, I'll go on to the ethnomusicological and talk a little bit about polyrhythm in West Africa, in Ghana, where I've done a lot of work since 1988, give you some background, some context, so you can begin to understand what these rhythms actually are and why maybe they're not just rhythms, but they're something more than rhythms. And finally, after Meki Nzui, who's a Nigerian musicologist working in South Africa, I'll talk about what he called melorhythm, which is sort of the fusion of rhythm and melody, but I'll expand that to what I call polykino-melorhythm. So first of all, what is rhythm? I mean, there's many definitions. We could say it's a series of temporal durations, or simply durations, maybe is enough, notes or rests that cohere as a gestalt, as a line. A note is a duration that begins with an attack, and a rest is a duration attack. Durations may carry variable emphases, that is different levels of accent. A note has its emphasis in its presence, and a rest in its absence. Now, it's important to distinguish at the very outset, in order to be clear about all these terms, between objective and subjective sound. Objective sound is sound that has some acoustical reality. Subjective sound is only in your head. It's your mind's ear, in a way. So a note, objectively, has energy. It's acoustic energy. A rest also has energy, but it's a low energy. Subjectively, we feel a note as a kind of a presence, and we feel a rest as an absence. There may or may not be a correspondence between the subjective and the objective. It's possible to hear something in your head that doesn't have any reality. For example, most of you can probably just imagine a melody and hear it. And certain musical constructs like meter, like tempo, like key or tonal center, they don't have an absolute objective reality. And in some cases, it may be very difficult or almost impossible to determine what they are, because really they depend on the listener and there's no access to their psychological perception. Okay, so representations. I'll be using a few different possible representations. We can talk about periodic rhythms and aperiodic rhythms. If it's a periodic rhythm or a cyclic rhythm, it might make sense to use this sort of circular notation some musicologists have used, sort of a pie chart. So here we're going around clockwise. It's sort of uncertain where to start. Now, psychologically, rhythms usually do have your mind periodic cycle. If we write it out as notehead, I'm not assuming that you all know musical notation. Some of you probably do, and maybe some of you don't. So I'm going to try to get around that by using different kinds of representations. In that pi wedge, which has a number 2 in it, corresponds to the first note, which is a quarter note clockwise. So we have 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. This is going to be a very important rhythm in this presentation. So try to remember that. 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. With note heads, we have quarter, quarter, eighth, quarter, 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 eighth. I can equally write that in a sort of a table as 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. I could write it using this sort of algebraic notation that I've developed, 2 times 2 plus 1 plus 3 times 2 plus 1. Okay, now I could start somewhere else in the cycle, though. I could start down at the bottom, and then it becomes 2, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 1. Very different. How does this actually sound? So I can play it simply by counting those durations as being equal numbers, equal sized pulses. So we have 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. Sorry, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. That rhythm happens to be very important, not just in Ghana, but throughout Africa. It's very, very common. You'll notice it adds to 12. And in fact, one sort of mnemonic, and I won't claim any relationship, but if you know something about the piano, if you take a major scale on the piano on the white keys, you'll see you have 2 semitones in the first scale degree, 2 semitones in the next one, then only 1, then 2, 2, 2, 1. Those are the separations between the white notes on the piano. So it actually lines up with a major scale. That's just a mnemonic. I don't think there's any deep reason for that. Now there's also aperiodic rhythms, and we can represent them probably not with a long sequence of notes or of numbers or of blocks. I would find a subset of polyphony, which means you have more than one of these gestalts, but we're looking at the rhythmic aspect. In a very broad definition, any multiple simultaneous rhythms could count as polyrhythm, including what I call nested octave harmonics, that is doublings, where you simply have twice the frequency of the beating. But in a more narrow definition, a polyrhythm usually ends up referring to multiple contrasting simultaneous rhythms. So it's not just any multiple rhythms, but they really contrast. And where does the contrast come from? They don't line up in some sense. So there's either some kind of displacement, what's called in music sometimes a backbeat, an offbeat, or a syncopation, or they could be implying totally different divisions of time, totally different beats. I'll give you some examples. Here's the rhythm that we just looked at before, which is from a Ghanaian piece called Agbeko. And again, you remember it was 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. So here's one way to represent that on this table here. Line A has precisely that rhythm. We have an X in the box to mark the attack. So we have 2. Can you see the pointer also?
Yes.
We can see the cursor, yeah.
Yeah, you can see the cursor. Okay, so we have 2, 2, whoops, I was gonna play it. 2, 2, and then 1, 2, 2, 2, and then 1. Okay, so that's the 12. But there's some other parts here, and I can represent them in the table. We have this B, which leaves 1 out and then hits 2 and 3, leaves 4 out, hits 5 and 6, leaves 7 out, hits 8 and 9, and so on. And we have a few others. Where there's a dash, it's sort of like a subdued beat. It's a rest, but there's still some acoustic energy there. So let's listen to the rotation. It's exact same up. A. We'll add B. Now we'll add C. Add D. So that's a polyrhythmic texture. Now, that's a very complicated one, which is typical in the Ewe area, the Ewe speaking area of Ghana, to have these, multiple lines, and they each seem to be bringing in a different kind of beat. More typically, you hear in Western music, Western popular music, a lot of polyrhythm in the form of a backbeat. So we have the backbeat is kind of a shift. We have the fundamental frequency here, which is, this is just sort of represents a bar. So we have the fundamental. And then we have the octave, which is twice as fast, just like in melodic or tonal frequency analysis, you would have the octave being twice the frequency. And then you have the octave backbeat, which shifts by 180 degrees, just shifts over. So let's listen to that, the fundamental, the octave, then you're going to hear this sort of alignment, and then we're shifted over and hear the backbeat. Octave. So this is typical of drum set. You have the bass drum, then the bass drum, snare drum. I don't know if any of you have played. I took some drum set lessons, and this is the first thing you learn to do is play that backbeat. Another kind of polyrhythm is syncopation. Syncopation is similar to backbeat, but it's at a finer scale. So here we have the fundamental, the octave, the second octave, and then we shift over from the second octave and we get this syncopation. I have it notated below using standard Western musical notation. Let's listen to that. Fundamental, octave, second octave, now syncopation. So they're just offset. Now musically, that doesn't sound so interesting, but the music would then take advantage of that shifted second octave, which really defines a new line of pulse. Syncopation is typical of so-called ragtime music, the most famous exponent of which is Scott Joplin, who lived from the late 19th century into the early 20th. He became very famous with a revival of his music in the 1970s. And when I was a teenager, this was all the rage. Joshua Rifkin, a pianist, composer at Boston University, released an LP in 1970. That was sort of the beginning of the revival of Joplin's music. And then some of you may remember the 1973 hit film, The Sting, featuring The Entertainer by Scott Joplin, which won a lot of Academy Awards. And so I got into ragtime, and I, during the 70s, composing, because I composed some rags. This is Scott Joplin's piece, The Entertainer. So the way this works, the left hand is doing offbeats, or doing backbeats. The right hand is doing a lot of syncopation. So here's my Joplin-inspired rag. I wrote in the mid-70s, I can't remember when, and I could actually barely remember the melody, but I just sort of jotted it down and put it together for you here. This is just the first part of it. So the blue boxes encircle the backbeat, and the red boxes are square around the syncopation. So we have the backbeat and the syncopation. The syncopation tends to follow a certain pattern in ragtime, 1 + 2 + 1. So it'll be, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that. And as I said, the left hand follows sort of this umpa beat. So it goes low, high, and it's always emphasizing that second one, which gives you that sense of backbeat. So here's my piece. Can you hear that? Seems very soft. Continue. All right, anyway, that gives you an idea. Now, if we look at it this way, in case you can't read music, this is sort of what's going on here. The right hand is up here, and you see it's going da 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 ba ba ba. So that's where it's syncopated. Da 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 ba ba ba. And the left hand is doing this umpa. Boom tap, boom tap, boom tap, boom tap. Now this is not the most intense form of polyrhythm because it's still all within this one frame of basically 8 pulses per bar. But suppose we try to space these out more. So here, in a sense, we have this 3 here, 3 red X's and the 2 blue X's. Suppose we try to space them equally, then we're going to get something more like the African polyrhythm. This is so-called 2 against 3 or 3 against 4. So now let's go back to our grid of 12, and we're going to take different frequencies. We start with F, the fundamental frequency, and as well as G, which is sort of a subharmonic, which is half of F. So here's F, and then we have twice F and 3 times F, and then we'll take 1.5 times F, which is the same as 3 times G. Okay, so in this box we get F, which is just like that. We have 2F, which is twice as fast. We have 3F, which is 3 times as fast. And then we have 1.5F, which is 1.5 times as fast, or twice as fast as the subharmonic. Then I'm going to play for you these different sounds, and hopefully you can hear it. Was the sound too low before? Because I could barely hear it. I don't know why it's gotten soft.
For some reason, your voice is a lot louder than the music.
Yeah, I don't know. It's in the intricacies of Zoom, because it doesn't happen that way when I'm not on Zoom. But at any rate, let's just listen. That's F, 2F, now 3 against 2. Now 3 against 4. So that sort of gives you the representation, the theory, as well as the sound of these kinds of polyrhythms, which are very, very fundamental to African music, much of which does use this sort of grid of 4. And the beauty about, the grid of 12, and the beauty of 12 is that it's divisible by a bunch of different factors, and this allows you to get these kinds of polyrhythms. So we go back to this bell pattern, this 7 strikes, long, long, short, long, 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 short that we started off with. As I said, it's kind of got a mnemonic in the major scale, a whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And then we can look at how it can be divided. So we can have 4 times 3, 4 groups of 3. We can have 6 groups of 2. We can have 3 groups of 4. And then we can start to combine those. We can do what's called a hemiola. We can have 3 groups of 2 plus 2 groups of 3, or 2 groups of 3 plus 3 groups of 2. All these different ways of doing it. So let's listen to this. So that's the basic bell. That's 4 groups of 3. Now let's do 6 groups of 2. Whoop. Let's try 6 groups of 2 here. Three groups of 4. And then of course we can do more than one at once, and then we get the polyrhythm. So we'll go, for example, whoops. I'm doing now the 6 and the 4. How about the 3? 3 groups of 4. And then we can do the hemiolas. Hemiola is important too. Let me play that. Here's a hemiola. 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1. So you find all of these in the music. Here's a notation. Two times 6, which is, and 2F, which is 4 3s. Then 3F are 6 groups of 2. And then 1 5F. To feel against the others. So here's the tabular representation of all that I just did. And I won't belabor the point, but we can represent it very easily with these X's. You can see the 2 groups of 6, the 4 groups of 3, the 6 groups of 2, and so on. Now there's some more difficult ones also we could try. The hemiola I already sort of gave you. You can also try to divide it by 8. Now the tricky thing here is you can't divide 12 by 8 evenly, so you have to interpolate them. And we can also do some offbeats by doing another phase shift. So we could take 1 plus 2 times 4, but now shift it 120 degrees and see what happens there. So listen to these. That's 2 times 3 plus 3 plus times 2. Now 8 times 1.5 is a little hard. We'll start with 4 times 3 and then double it. 4 times 3. Sorry, that's the other hemiola. 3 times 2 plus 2 times 3. times 3. Now we're going to double it. A little tricky. And then we do those off beats. So there's a lot of possibilities. Okay, meter, by contrast, is a feel. It's subjective. Meter is not necessarily going to be sounded anywhere. It's a subjective polyrhythm comprising a set of subjective periodic rhythms. Meter is felt to provide the fundamental temporal organization for a particular person at a particular moment in time. Meter is therefore a cycle of a fixed duration. It's something like a bar in music. That bar includes nested beat and pulse rhythms. Those are very regular rhythms with fixed, repeating a fixed duration. In other words, it's a cycle of length 1, essentially. Objective sound has to support the meter or won't be heard. So there has to be enough cues in the actual acoustics to support the meter that you're trying to impose on it. Otherwise, it just won't work. And I would argue that people can only really have 1 meter at a time. So when you come to polymeter, there's a lot of controversy about this because can you actually hear more than 1 meter at once? And I would argue that you cannot. However, the same sound might support more than 1 meter. So that's how I define polymeter. It isn't that you're actually hearing multiple meters at once. I don't think that's possible, but you can have more than 1 meter possible sequentially or between different listeners. So I would argue that there can only be 1 meter at a time for a single person. That is, the meter of particular music and a person and a time has at most 1 value. It could be there's no meter. Some music isn't metered. Maybe you don't hear a meter. It's up to you what you want to hear. But I don't believe there can be more than 1. But it can change over time or across listeners. The difficulty is, and for ethnomusicologists it's quite tricky, you want to know what the meter is. You're listening to this complex African texture, but it's impossible really to know what meter a person is hearing. You can observe their behavior, how they clap, how they dance, how they tap their feet. It doesn't necessarily tell you. People might tap their foot on the offbeat. People might clap on the offbeat. So it's very difficult to know. And the irony is that by the time the person has enough musical education to really be able to tell you, yeah, this is the meter I'm hearing it in, by then they're no longer, culturally part of that village life. They've come out of it, they've gone to university, maybe they've gone abroad to study, and so they become a bit of an outsider. So it's always been a puzzle for ethnomusicologists to really understand what the meter is. And some people argue very stridently that they know what it is, and other people say you can't know. Now, let's go to a more simple meter, 4/4 or common time. This is all factors of 2. In other words, it's all octaves. The whole polyrhythm is octaves. We have a bar down here at the bar level, and then we have the half bar, which has 2 beat points in a sense, but they're subjective. They're not actually sounded. Then we have 4, the second octave, which is a factor of 4. We have 4 points. Those are something like the 4 quarters of the bar. Then we have the half, those are the beats. Then we have half beat, which is 8. And then we have a pulse, which is 16. That's usually how 4/4 is divided, down to the 16th note. And if you add together all the beats that you get from each of these rhythms, then this chart shows you how much emphasis there is on every single pulse within the 16 pulses of 4/4. So you can see that the first gets the most with 5, and then the 9th, which is the midway point, is next with 4, and then it kind of goes down from there. So that's 4/4. Again, it's not being played by anybody. It's just something that you hear inside your head. Most people don't even realize they're hearing it, but they're hearing it. Other ways to represent it, we could do it with note heads as opposed to this table. We can just use note heads, or we can use this algebraic formulation that I have at the bottom there, that 4/4 is 2 half notes, which is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 eighth notes, and so on. Now with 12 that we were talking about, now we're in a compound meter. Compound meter means it's not just factors of 2 anymore. We have a factor of 3. So we have the whole bar, which is the fundamental frequency F. We have a half bar, which is 2F. We have the octave number 2, which is 4F. But then we go up by a factor of 3, And essentially we're going up by another octave and a fifth. If you know music, you know that a factor of 3 takes you up a 12th, which is an octave plus a fifth. And so that's why it's called a compound meter. It's no longer a simple meter. And this is some of the beats that you get when you add it all together. Other representations of 12/8, just like before, there's other ways to represent it. Okay, so we have the objective sound and the meter, and some of them get quite complicated, so you won't necessarily be able to guess what the meter is. For example, this example, if I asked you to clap to that, you'd probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's pretty simple. But now let's go to this last one. I know I'm running out of time. Anyone want to tell me how much time I have left? 15 minutes?
If you can finish within 10 minutes, that'd be great.
All right.
So we can take time for questions.
I'll try to finish in 10 minutes. So let me just play this last one, which is quite tricky. I don't think you're going to hear it. This is actually used in Ghana, but I don't think you're going to hear it the way the Ghanaians would hear it. I play the bell rhythm, and then you can try to guess or clap along and see if you can sort of intuit where those beats might be, where the metrical feel is. Then I'm going to give you the feel that I think you're probably going to get, and then I'm going to give you the one that actually is used in performance. I'm guessing you hear something like this. This is actually how it is in Ghana. Unexpected to most people who are foreign to the musical culture. So polymetricity is difficult in 6-pulse music because it's hard. You don't have too many risers to work with, but it's much more common in 12-pulse music. And so that's the kind of music where you find quite a bit of polymeter. Again, it's impossible to tell what meter a person is actually feeling.
Michael, can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
I just got notice from Rob that he doesn't need so much time in his presentation. So we can steal a little bit from the third presentation and give you a little bit of extra. So you have another 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rob.
Absolutely agreed. Please go ahead.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to stop you. Please go ahead.
All right, I have a few fun things to share, but you know, if we don't get to the end, it's okay. So it's impossible to tell really what meter a person is feeling, particularly when they're a village drummer and you're not really communicating. I don't speak Ewe, for example, the language of the Agbeko piece. So you have to intuit it from verbalizations or from what they're playing or dancing. Okay, so here's the different ways of sort of framing it. We can say we have 12/8, this meter, which I can write as 2 times 2 times 3, right? You have these 12 eighth notes, and we group them in threes. We're able to do that music with these bars and have the next level is 3. And then at the next level, we double that, we get 2 dotted half notes, and then finally the whole thing is 1 bar. A totally different way to do it, instead of 2 times 2 times 3, we can do 2 times 3 times 2. Still multiplies to be 12, but the organization is different. Now we group them in 2s, we group the 2s together, and then we have 3 of those 2s combining at the next level, and then 2 of those to the final level. Or we can do 3 times 2 times 2, and then we get a 3/2 meter. So there's all these different ways of organizing the meter, which can be sort of implied by the music itself. All right, I think I'm going to skip this because we've already gone over it enough. Different polymetric interpretations of the same polyrhythm. So we could interpret the same piece in different ways, in 12/8, in 6/4, in 3/2, and 3/4. But I'm going to move ahead. Let me give you just a tiny bit of it. So here it is in 12/8. I'm clapping. That's the clap. Now the exact same thing in 6/4. Same thing in 3/2. The music is the same. The clapping just indicates where you're feeling the meter. Now let's try the hemiola way of feeling it, which is 3/4 plus 6/8. So we have 1 2 1 2 1 2, and then 1 2 3 1 2 3. You often hear people clapping this way. So it's sort of like this Necker cube that you're probably familiar with. Which way do you see it? Is it 12/8 or 6/4? 12/8 or 6/4? Okay, so most music contains polyrhythm at different levels of contrast. Most popular music, for example, in the West has a backbeat, a little bit of syncopation. Not all music supports multiple meters though. And 12/8 provides many possibilities for achieving polymeter due to the factorization. Now, one piece that sort of caught my ear a number of years ago because my kids listened to it is Stand by Eminem. It actually has quite a bit of polyrhythm in it, but it's more syncopation and backbeat. There's no polymeter. So that's Kaido singing. And that melody somehow must have gotten stuck in my head because I composed something, but I filtered it through the 12/8 that I knew from Ghana, and I came up with something very different. So here's her singing, and it's actually quite, I transcribed this the other day. It has a lot more syncopation than I thought. Here, the blue, again, is the backbeat, and the red is the syncopation, and she's got quite a bit of syncopation in there. You've seen all those 16th notes. But it's very hard to get any polymeter in there because it's in square 4. So now I do what I'm calling polystand, which I composed. I didn't even know I took it from this at first, but I shifted the whole thing into 12, and then you get the possibility of polymeter. So here's I'm doing it here in hemiola. 3/4 plus 6/8. So I'm going to skip these, but anyway, I want to do a little video. This is me playing it. And when I was in Ghana in 1988, Michael Cohen actually sent me this drum machine that you see here, which was amazing because I was living in a shanty town. I couldn't believe it even arrived. I've kept it all these years. It has a very nice African beat. So he sent it to me in Ghana. I didn't really use it so much there, but I've used it a lot since, especially with that 12/8. Hi, everybody. This drum machine arrived in Ghana in 1988. Michael Cohen sent it as a gift, and it was quite amusing when it finally arrived in the shanty town where I was living, and people there thought it was quite amusing too. So thank you, Michael, and I've kept it all these years. I'm going to set it to its Afro setting because it has a 12/8, which will go well with this piece. So here we go. That's 4 times 3. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1. This is in hemiola. 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. Now in 6. 6 times 6. Actually, yeah. Three groups of 4. Back to Camila. So now, having gone through all that, there's a problem with isolating rhythm. Rhythm is a kind of reduction of the musical holism, and it's a sort of a distortion of African musical thought to reduce things to rhythm, I would argue. Now, reductions can be very useful in ethnomusicology. They can be temporal, they can be tonal, they could be melodic, and they're important analytical tools. We could take something like this bluesy melody, which I don't have time to play for you, and you can see it's written across sort of like in a drum machine or a sequencer, and you have the notes going up and then the time going across. And if we want to reduce it to rhythm, we just simply get rid of the notes, and there we have the rhythm, right? Or we could do another kind of reduction to tonality. We just shift everything left and we get just the pitches, D, F, G. Or we reduce it to melody. We reduce it just to a pitch sequence. And that's all we have left. So these kinds of reductions are useful analytically, but you also risk impoverishing the music, reducing it. And especially when presenting non-Western context to a Western audience, people may really misunderstand the meaning of the music. So what the ethnomusicologist wants to do all the time is add context. So what is this rhythm that we've been discussing all this time, this 12? We start with ethnomusicology. What is ethnomusicology? Ethnomusicology is the holistic study of people making music, not just focusing in on one little element. So we learn about people making music and try to understand their culture in that way. So we can learn about the people of Ghana by learning about their music. A few maps here. Here's Ghana. By the way, that's the 0, point. I like that. 0 latitude, 0 longitude is closest to Ghana. So here's Ghana. There are now 16 regions, used to be 10. They've subdivided some of them. And I've spent a lot of time in the Volta region, which is where that music I played for you came, that rhythm, and also up in Tamale in the north. There's about 30 million people today, over 50 cultural groups, each one with their language and their music. There's 9 main languages used on the media, including Ewe. Ewe is the one we're going to focus in on because that's where this music is coming from. But English is the official national language. I never learned to speak any of the languages. I just communicated with people in English. So here's a scene from Accra, the old British section, some of the children. Music everywhere in life, and I don't really have time to go through it all now, but there's a lot of popular music. It draws on Western pop. There's a lot of Christian and Muslim music. There's work songs, and then there's the traditional community music, which is what I want to really focus in on. And this is where you find the most polyrhythmic and polymetric music, I would say. So there's pop music, there's church music, there's Muslim music. Up in Tamale, I heard about these people playing this pressure drum, which actually can talk. It's a Hausa drum, actually originally from Nigeria. Another one from the Dagomba people, another talking drum. You press those strings and the pitch can go up and down. Here's some little ensemble that played. I'll skip over this because of time. There's a lot of music for work. When they're pounding fufu like this, you'll find they're using a beat to try to keep in sync. So the woman who's actually moving, that's sort of like a doughy substance that they use to eat sort of like bread. And you can see that the pestle is very big and heavy, and she would hit the hand if they didn't have a rhythm for moving back and forth. There's a great example, if there were time I would play for you, but this is sort of a work song. This guy's stamping, canceling stamps in the post office and producing this wonderful music. But we'll go to straight to, I'm sorry?
Michael, you can take another 5 minutes if you want.
Yeah, I'll just wrap it up in those last 5 minutes. So I wanted to focus really on traditional Ghanaian music because that's what I was alluding to with the polymeter and polyrhythm. So this is music that uses local languages, local music, instruments, and so on. It's less influenced by Western music, although there's some. It blends live acoustic music, poetry, and dance. These things all go together. Also, it involves the community. People are all participating. It isn't a professional music where some people would only be watching. Everyone joins in one way or another. They dance, they sing, they clap. And it's closely connected to social life, especially funerals, chieftaincy ceremonies, and the rituals of African traditional religion, which is still quite important in many parts of the country. Oops. So some misconceptions that traditional music isn't just old music for old people. It's actually vital for all ages, but more in rural areas. When you get to the urban areas, it's a little bit less prominent. There are many neo-traditional forms, like there's one called Panlogo, and older forms that are always being renewed. So it's not just like a fixed, like classical music that you cannot change. No, there's people composing new rhythms, new songs, new dances that go along with it. It isn't just percussion and rhythm. Westerners often go, and that's what they're looking for. They're looking for drumming, they're looking for rhythm, and so that's what they hear. And they don't know the local languages like me. But in fact, singing is always central, and with the singing comes the poetry. So often the poet or the poet singer or the poet singer composer is the most central figure. The poetry carries melody for a very interesting reason, because Ghana's languages and most of the West African languages are tonal. So the language itself carries tones, and those tones get kind of embedded in the poetry, and they can also be carried into the drumming. The percussion almost always supports dancing. So there's no way you distinguish between music and dance. It's always, always together. There's no words locally that distinguish that. And percussion can speak the tonal languages through pitch and timbre. It won't be absolutely unambiguous, but the percussion can imitate, and also the melodic instruments can imitate the tones of the speech, and therefore they're able to speak. So percussion is more than simply rhythm. So poetry carries melody and drums can talk and sing. The pressure drums that I showed you before, they're very flexible because they have sort of a continuous range of pitch. But another kind of talking drum is the atumpan, which can imitate the high and low tones of the language. So for example, in the Ewe language from the Southeast, to is mountain, and to is mortar, and to is buffalo. So they're completely different words, just differentiated by tone, which we don't have in English, but you do have in Chinese, for example. Speak by tones, and the atumpan is a pair of drums that's used to do that kind of speaking. Here's a, I'll just show you a little bit of this. They were having a school competition. And so the way it worked was the judges would hand the student a little piece of paper. He would unroll it. He didn't know what was coming, and then read a proverb, and he would have to drum that proverb, and they would rank them on how well they did. Here the students are drumming. And there's a lot of that going on also in the Ashanti area, drums. So many people think African music is all percussion. There's actually a lot of other pitched instruments. I don't have time to show them all. There's a lot of drums, obviously, but there's a lot of other instruments too. There's a xylophone.
Africa, yeah.
Here's also an instrument itself speaks. Here's one in the museum, very old one. There's flutes. The pentaben. There's a harp called seprawa. It always goes with poetry, it goes with singing. These arts are all going together. So you have this sort of unity of the arts, that rhythm and melody and movement and poetry are always woven together. And the people who do it are also woven together because they participate in multiple arts. Someone doesn't just do drumming. They don't specialize. They don't learn them separately. Like here you would go to a dance academy or to a music academy. They're all linked. So I've made that point. Okay, now let's just go to briefly to Agbeko, which is the rhythm that I showed you before. The Ewe people live in the southeast of the country, in the Volta region. This is the Volta region down to the right there. They're also in Togo. And there's a town called Jogaje where some of the videos I'm going to show you come from. Here's the way the countryside looks. Country road. And you have the percussion music, the songs, the dances, the costumes, the context, everything is going together. Now some of these drums, they call them drum, by the way. So the drum is not just the instrument, but they call the whole thing drum. The singing, the dancing, and the music. So here's some of the instruments, the rattle, the bell, which you heard, some of the bigger drums, some of the smaller drums, and the drums talk. Here's a picture of them drumming, playing the rattle, some of my students in Ghana. So there's a whole bunch of different drums, and the one I want to focus in on is called Achegbeko, or just Agbeko. This is considered to be a war drum. So Kinka is a funeral drum. I'll go through this. Agbaja is a funeral drum. Sometimes people go into trance. Drum for the thunder god. But then we get to the war drums. The music of war. So Agbe means life, Kor means clear. So the meaning of Agbeko is life is clear, the battle is over. And the drumming and the dancing was used to tell the story of the war. So the lead drummer would be playing special rhythms to signal the dancers what to do. The lead drummer would play something, and then the dancers would do a dance move. There would be a choreography that would show the behavior of the warriors on the battlefield. There aren't any battles anymore, but there used to be wars among the Ewe. So they would sort of tell stories. Here's, let me play you, okay. There's a fast and a slow version. The slow version will be more recognizable in terms of the 12 pulse cycle. So all the rhythms are in the 12s, which I already showed you. And we can do it as a wheel going back to the circular metaphor. So we have 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4, 4 times 3, 6 times 2, 12 times 1. So those are all the possible factorizations. And you get this polyrhythm. 3, 4, and 6 are the most common. And here's all the different drums that perform. There's a very nice website called thisworldmusic.com, and he has a mixer there where you can sort of turn on and off the different drums. And I don't have time to do that right now, but I'll just go back to this diagram that I showed you before. And now you can see what they are. So the first line was the bell, then the so-called kagan, which plays those off beats, the totoji, which plays 2 main beats, and then the kidi. And that's what we had at the very beginning, but you didn't know what the drums were. That was sound. So they talk. The kagan says, Miava Yafaya. we will come, go, we'll show. We are going to show our bravery. The Totoji says, Jogbe, G. Battlefield, on. We'll be on the battlefield. The Kiri says, Po afe godzi. Look home, side on. In other words, look back at home, look back at home. And the Klobato says, Beji ko mado. I will only sleep on the battlefield, meaning I will die in battle. Actually understands them, but the drummers tend to understand what they're doing. And this is where the Kagan fits, where the Totoji fits in the 12, the Kiri. And this back and forth movement sort of goes on, and then the lead drum will signal to them to do something. And here's what it looks like. So I just wanted to end by quoting Nziwi again, that he noted that the African rhythm is really melodic, that it's wrong to separate the melody from the rhythm. And so he coined this term mellow rhythm back in 1974. So I wanted to add that it's also kinetic. So it's sort of like kino mellow rhythm. It's also linguistic, lexico kino mellow rhythm, and it's polyrhythm. So it's poly lexico kino mellow rhythm. To see the holistic aspect of the rhythm, you can't just focus on the temporal durations, which is what rhythm is, but you have to look at the whole. So African music is never simply rhythmic. Rather, at its heart, it's this complex which draws in music, poetry, tonality, and ultimately culture and language in simultaneity. It expresses cultural meaning back to the people who perform it, and in this way, they maintain their social cohesion and also cultural continuity across the generations. So, and there, sorry, I've gone way over, but at least you got a sense of the holistic aspect of polyrhythm in Africa.
Thank you, Michael. You didn't go way over because Bill graciously agreed to slip his starting time, and you and Rob donated a few minutes. So we're glad to have that extra time to enjoy your presentation. Let me mention to the attendees that we're recording all these keynote sessions, and the organizing chair, Debo, will figure out some appropriate way of sharing them after the conference is ended. And also for this session, at least, 3 of the 4 keynote presentations have contributions in the proceedings for the conference. So you'll be able to enjoy a video replay of Michael's talk along with that of the other keynote presenters, and also look at the printed, the textual description that accompanied this when the proceedings are finally compiled, probably in a few months. I know that John Bryan had a question, and maybe some of the rest of you have some things you want to ask about. So I'm going to let John ask Michael whatever questions, and then Michael can take questions from the audience.
Sure.
Well, thank you. First of all, Michael, thank you for a fascinating and deeply insightful talk. And I think if I paraphrase correctly here, you made the point, by the time people are able to articulate their understanding of their own indigenous musical experience, they are then already beyond their prior musical state of mind. So they've somehow abstracted through higher learning, musical education or university, and they're sort of out of touch with the frame of mind that they had, if frame of mind is the right way to express it, but their state of being when they were playing music in an authentic indigenous way. And so but when I heard you say that, I never heard that in reference to, I just haven't thought about ethnomusicology enough, I guess. But I had read Walter Ong's Orality and Literacy, the Technologizing of the Word. And I wondered if you'd encountered that, because Ong in that book makes the point that when Greeks primarily, but Western thought transcended or changed out of an oral state of mind, the understandings of the oral were lost, and he articulates that very well. by expressing how language became much more abstract and no longer expressed the sort of the felt orange would have emerged amongst oral poets, where they would more directly link their expression to their bodily state, their feeling, their anxieties. And so as things became more abstract and as they became more literate, it was through that technology that they actually came up with new analogies for expression that didn't allow them to have the same connection with the oral life that they had had previously. So I wondered if that is how you feel about if there's a parallel in music.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I hesitate to overgeneralize, but it has always been my impression that the people, and there's a lot of very good African musicologists and ethnomusicologists who teach at the university and theorize and think about these things. And, you know, they have more insights for sure, especially if they grew up in a village. But it is my impression that through the educational system, people lose a certain understanding of the music. At least it's not clear that they have that they maintain the same understanding as they did, if they ever did have it. I mean, you know, many people don't grow up in the village, and you know, just because they're from Ghana or from Africa doesn't mean that they necessarily feel it in the same way. So there could be a great variety of ways of understanding the music. I don't think that the Western musical system that most people learn, or you know, are once they're exposed to it, are expected to apply, represents the music very well. I mean, and that's actually true of many musical traditions. It just doesn't. It may not even represent Western music all that well. I was kind of surprised when I transcribed Dido's singing. I mean, you get the sense that a lot is still oral, and the musical notation doesn't do it justice. And people, musicians, I think, have an intuitive sense of what they want to express. They don't just play mechanically as if it was a drum machine or a sequencer. But the music analysts are the ones who are maybe more guilty than the musicians of trying to kind of essentialize things. For example, I think there's often a level at which there is no unifying pulse, that there's a kind of a level of irrationality in most music, which is maybe something like a rubato in a Chopin, that you can't really put your finger on exactly what they're doing. Swing and jazz, I mean, it's not, it can't be actually made precise, but the musicologist or the ethnomusicologist will try to represent it in a notation which is very rigid. So there's bound to be some distortion in doing that.
And there's another twist on that too, isn't there? The development of the phonograph led to a kind of standard for how music would then be represented. So there's a kind of myth of there being a singular performance, whereas in the past there might have been a lot of riffing and
that's right.
Yeah,
and that's sort of an intermediate orality,
Chopin.
because when people learn something from the music notes, obviously then they're following that as their
Standard,
template, but they can also memorize something from a recording, and that has a different way of kind of standardizing. It may retain some of the irrational relationships and so on, but it's still a standard. And that didn't.
Could I interject something relevant to that point? Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
I just wanted to interject with the movement towards recording and then towards modern music production. We also saw a shift towards strict metric adherence that is still characterizing most modern popular music now in a remarkable way, that I want to pay respect to your point about the rubato underlying the music, because a lot of the people in the art of music recording who talk about this, they point out that music used to be recorded without a metronome, and some of the progressive rock of the 80s, for example, absolutely that underlying meter that you talk about as being so enigmatic. Well, it's enigmatic in there for sure, because they have grand pauses that they just all know about. They all know they're going to do them, and they also know when they're going to have a decrescendo, and you know, and they're all going to do all of that together, and that was lost in the 90s. Modern recording techniques with click tracks and strict adherence to the meter that everybody knows is actually restrictive and not so musical.
Right.
Well, we got killed by it and lost a lot of that lovely rubato feel that was in there in the swing and so forth. I mean, I could go on and on about this because I work in music recording, but I don't want to take us too far afield. Actually, what I'd kind of like to do is I'd like to use this as a segue into my presentation, which is coming up next. And the segue is, while I really appreciate the enigma of meter that researchers have had trouble putting their finger on, like how is it that we know the meter of a piece of music, and how did we get to know that that was a march versus a waltz, and all of these things are actually much more complicated than simply, oh, it has 3 beats to the measure or 4 beats to the measure. Not at all. It's not that simple. It's never that simple. I mean, I've also played a lot of swing in 12/8, and that actually has to be felt. You can't write 12 eighth notes in a measure and expect a swing guitar solo to follow what you've written. That never happens. That never works. Everybody knows you just got to feel that 12/8. It's not something that even gets notated. Most of the music doesn't even notate it. They just treat it as 4/4 and say, oh yeah, you'll feel the 12/8 of it.
Yeah.
So maybe this is consistent with your experience too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what I want to do though, I want to segue because I'm going to have to start my talk pretty soon. The segue is like this. There's something enigmatic, mystical, hidden beneath spatial media in how we know where we are in space and know how we move through space. And do you know what it is? It's akin to meter in that it's also a mystery to the researchers. It's a thing called your sense of direction. We all have a sense of direction, don't we? But what is? Where is your sense of direction? Show it to me. Nobody, no researcher knows what sense of direction really is. They just know that certain behavior in navigating through a space kind of indicates that people have a sense of direction. And that's one of the key concepts in the next talk I'm going to give today, is that sense of direction is this enigmatic thing that's very hard to define and very hard to put your finger on. And researchers have shown again and again, it's just an enigma. Is that kind of a cool connection? I mean, in spatial media, that's what I like to do, is draw those connections, because there's this enigma in time, enigma in space, and so on and so forth. And after all, music is always in space. So we could draw another connection there later in another conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. That's very
Cool.
insightful.
Oh, well, thanks. I really loved your presentation. I wish I could hear it for a couple more hours, and we should have a drumming circle sometime, which we'll see how that goes.
Hard to do on Zoom.
Yeah, well, but I think Michael and I would probably try to pull it off, wouldn't we, Michael?
I can say that I probably wouldn't sound any worse on Zoom than I do in real time.
Ah, well.
Anyway, thank you, John and Bill and others for stimulating and gratifying questions. If you're monitoring the chat stream, there's a lively exchange over there as well. Thanks especially to Michael for bringing up all these provocative and interdisciplinary ideas. It's a lot for me to assimilate, including the softening of digital quantization to a more analog or rubato appreciation for rhythm. Thanks to Bill for interpolating a segue into his own talk, which I think we can start right now. So if
I think
you're
we
ready,
might as
Bill.
well. I'm gonna let it fly. I've got to make sure I can share my screen. That means, Michael, if you can give up your control of the sharing of the screen, then I can bring mine up.
Yeah, actually, I'm
done
not
that?
the host of this. So if Debo's still
Well,
online,
I'll tell you what, I'll just give it a try right now and see if I can get the screen. Oh, I have got it.
You should be able to do it.
Excellent. And I have. Have I not?
No, not yet.
Hold on. Share. I'm sharing now. Oh, please. I haven't had a snag earlier when somebody didn't actually defeat the previous sharing of a screen. It wouldn't let mine be shared. Make sure that that's not what has happened now.
It's said that one participant can share at a time. So Michael is not sharing right now. So Bill, you should be able to share.
Okay. I'm trying it now.
Yeah.
How's that? Oh, now you've got it.
Yeah.
Okay, but now, of course, I want to make my PowerPoint presentation a little bigger, so I'm going to bring it full screen.
You have to do
Are we
it from
good?
within the software. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got it now. I'm wiping my pictures out so I can see what I've got on the screen. But I'm going to go ahead and proceed. You can see my title, I guess.
If you want,
Somebody
Bill, you
tell
can
me.
turn on subtitling. There's a speech to text captioning in PowerPoint. You can turn it on with J.
On J?
If
Is
you
it?
push the key J, it toggles the subtitling on and off.
I'll try it one more time because that just made a beep at me.
Oh,
Try it again. Okay.
you have
Hit a
to-
capital J maybe. Okay.
It's
Is it
better.
doing it now? Okay.
No.
No. Sorry.
Okay, that's all right.
I'll tell you what. Just type like a madman in the chat window everything I say, Michael. How's that? No. Okay. Let's forget that. All right. So I'm going to talk about spatial navigation by seated users of multimodal augmented reality systems. And you may wonder why I would ever choose such a crazy topic for a spatial media conference, but I think I might convince you before the end of this that it actually fits pretty well. And here now I'm going to go to my next slide to try to make that first point. I'm citing an overview presentation from 20 years ago because I was present at the 2001 International Symposium on Spatial Media, and this is actually one of my slides from 20 years ago. The three topics: what are spatial media, exemplary spatial media display systems, and exemplary human-centered design cases. And now if I go to my next slide, you'll see how I have cleverly moved it towards spatial navigation. So the first point, what is spatial navigation? And then why focus upon the seated user, and why multimodal augmented reality systems? So that's what I'm going to talk about this year. This is my stepping off point that I think Michael will appreciate, actually follows that superposition theme that he mentioned. We heard superposition of rhythms to make polyrhythms, and now we're going to superpose different sensory display modalities like visual and auditory and proprioception, vestibular sensation, and so on and so forth. We're going to superpose all of those in an augmented reality system to create a true spatial media immersive experience for supporting spatial navigation. And why am I focusing on that topic? Well, I've done some work there that I kind of like to talk about, so that's why. But 20 years ago, this is one of my slides. This is not what I'm going to talk about today. It's an example of what I'm not going to talk about. But 20 years ago, Michael Cohen and I went down to the IEEE VR conference in Yokohama, and this was a see-through display for navigation that was featured there, and they let you take it out and give it a try. You can't see what I'm seeing, but it was in fact an augmented reality system that superposed graphics on what I was seeing. This is what I was looking at the time. I was looking at the museum in Minato Mirai there in Yokohama. And what it showed me, what it superimposed on my view with the transparent glasses that I was wearing, you could see the museum entrance. And then if you wanted to know how to get back to the conference, you could see, the arrow showed you that's how to get back to the IEEE VR conference. This is a simulation. I didn't have access to what they actually showed me, so I've just simulated it for you. Anyways, now I have to return to my first bullet point there, which I swear is a little more enigmatic than you might think because of this mystical sense of direction that we all seem to have that researchers can't really measure very well. So what is spatial navigation? Well, for us humans, put simply, it's the process by which we humans learn where we are and how we get from where we are to where we want to be. and considering how we interact with sensory information as we attempt to make our way through this world. And we must confront the problem of how simulated sensory information might be employed to aid us in spatial navigation. And you might guess I'm not going to talk about the GPS unit in your car, because that's not quite what I'm getting at when I talk about this augmented reality with spatial media that is really trying to take advantage of what humans usually use when they're moving around in the world. So that's why I get at this in the next point. In the context of multimedia, multimodal augmented reality systems that are giving you spatial media, well, changes in the simulated sensory information must be coupled with detected users' movements in order to afford the most natural spatial navigation experience. And this would take advantage of human capacities for sensory motor integration, which means when you send an efferent command to your muscles to move yourself, to move your head, to move your body, whatever, that's a motor command for which you have changing sensory stimulation coupled with the result of your motion, and therefore you can take advantage of what we seem to have been designed to do as multimodal behaving creatures in this world. We use sensory motor integration to make sense of where we are and how to get where we want to be. Well, I have mentioned the word affordance, so now I think I have to talk about affordances for one more slide. But you're going to like this one because you may not know it. Don Norman actually wrote a book about sense of direction. So speaking of affordances, what answer do we expect to get from Don Norman? You know the Don Norman I'm talking about is the author of the 1988 now classic Design of Everyday Things book. Of course, in '88 it was called The Psychology of Everyday Things. He had to re-release it later with a better name, which is really what the book was about, how to design things for human users. So here's the book that he wrote with Eric Johnson. This is the cover art. The book is entitled Inner Navigation. So the first author is Eric Johnson, but here, just because I'm so pleased with it, I want to share with you what Don Norman says in the preface to the book. So this is a 2002 publication, and Don Norman writes this. Once upon a time, a strange man wandered into my office at UCSD, the University of California in San Diego. Eric Johnson was his name, and navigation was his game. I think people have an inner compass, he told me, and when it goes wrong, the most amazing things happen. And for over an hour, he told me tales of confusion. Can you relate to this already? You see where he's going with this? In summary, each of us has some sense of direction, even though we don't have immediate awareness of it. Within our minds, we must have a directional reference frame that we rely upon to orient ourselves. We rely on this inner compass. This is still Don Norman's words, by the way. We rely on this inner compass to let us know in which direction to go to reach a desired destination. But if we are asked how we know, we actually have no answer. Rather, it seems to operate automatically. So here are the key concepts in spatial navigation that I want to address today. And I hope I've engaged your interest enough to want to stick with this and see that there's actually some experimental research in this area that has some implications for how you would design multimodal augmented reality display systems for supporting spatial navigation. So first key concept is just the question, what is this sense of direction that we seem to have? Second, what can be done to heighten the accuracy of the inner compass for seated users of augmented reality technology? Now, you see, the inner compass is that thing that Johnson, the first author of the book with Don Norman, talks about. He says, sense of direction, it's almost like having an inner compass. You can't see the inner compass, but it seems to determine your behavior. Recognizing that some individuals have a consistently reliable sense of direction since their childhood, a good question is, can we temporarily augment a user's inner compass when it is otherwise not generally accessible to them? it's actually sad but true. And in the paper that we're going to have in your hands in 2 weeks in a final draft, I'll even talk about some of the sad cases of brain damage to the temporal lobe can rob you suddenly of your sense of direction and actually destroy the inner compass that you might have enjoyed your whole life. Suddenly, because of some a stroke or blunt trauma or something, takes out that part of the temporal lobe that wipes out your inner compass, and it's gone. Anyways, I'll stop talking about the morbid details of the damage that could happen. I'll talk more about just spatial navigation in interactive multimedia and VR. So there are several notable experts investigating this area of spatial navigation that I really must mention. They're employing interactive spatial media in virtual and in mixed reality. They really would have been good keynote presenters, some of these people, at a spatial media conference like this one. Perhaps the most notable, or more notable of many that I've spoken to, is Bernhard Rieke. Used to be of Tübingen in Germany, now of Simon Fraser University. Perhaps we should begin by learning from experts like Bernhard Rieke what we need to know about how the human occupants of this are able to navigate through the spaces of this world, whether those spaces are physical, virtual, or physical with superimposed or superposed virtual elements. And I give you a reference to one of my favorite papers by Rieke, along with other colleagues, Valiabaye. Back in 2009, they published the paper, Moving Sounds Enhance the Visually Induced Self-Motion Illusion, which is called Circular Vection in Virtual Reality. And here's what the subjects in that study saw. Can you guess how I know? How do I know this is what the subjects saw? That's right. I was one of the subjects in this study. The study didn't take place in Tübingen. The square, the marketplace that you see here is in Tübingen, Germany, but actually the study was completed at Chalmers University in Sweden. And so up at the top of the screen here, you see this wrap around 360-degree shot, and in a chair, the lower left, you see someone sitting in a chair looking at a display, a curved screen display of this, and they could rotate in place and see the whole environment that's wrapped onto a cylinder for them. So that's published in this paper, as I said, but now the big surprise is, unbeknownst to Bernhard Rieke, I was a subject in his study that was taking place in this presentation of the Tübingen marketplace. I did invite Professor Rieke to McGill University for a workshop, a related workshop back in 2008. And only then did he find out, seen all of the stimulating experience of rotating around in place. I think it's very interesting to talk about. Maybe you would rather hear him talk about his studies at some point, so I won't go on too long about them. But there's one more study, much more recent study, that I like to tell you about because I think it's a really fascinating way he's got of letting people interact in VR with their sense of direction and navigate through space. This is actually called the Navichair. This is Dr. Rieke's most recent project on spatial navigation. It was done with postgrad Wen Vo, I believe is how you would pronounce that. And that research project, published in 2019, is all about how to use a chair. Basically, you're not really moving anywhere, you're not going anywhere in space, but because you can move around in space by moving yourself in the chair, not just twisting around, but also use your feet to move yourself and to lean forward and lean back to control yourself in your virtual locomotion. But, you know, I want to tell you that you don't actually have to have such a fancy, elaborate device that lets you do that, although most of what I'm going to talk about is seated applications. I want to tell you about an early experience I had. I had an early realization about spatial auditory cues to self-motion that could aid in spatial orientation. And another way of saying it is how simulated sensory information might be employed to aid in spatial navigation, in fact, through a maze. So that's what I'm going to talk about. In the following example, I emphasize that changes in sensory information need not be experienced firsthand, since mouse movements controlling a visualized avatar, like a character in a video game, those mouse movements can afford a very natural spatial navigation experience. And we can still take advantage of the human capacities for sensory motor integration, even though actually we're not experiencing firsthand that motion. We're actually secondhand experiencing it in our stead. The avatar in video game is the one that's moving. But if you listen to what the avatar is hearing, as if your ears were where the avatar's ears are, suddenly you have all the benefits of normal sensory motor integration. Again, compare this point with those made by Rike et al. He's got a paper where he talks about moving through virtual reality without moving, and published in 2012 in the journal Cognitive Processing. Anyways, here's my experience. I don't know if you remember these kind of games. This is from the N64, the Nintendo Cube, we also called it. And this is Mario in a game that some of you probably played back in the 90s, I guess it was. But what happened in this game that I have to tell you about because it opened my eyes to what was possible, the sound of a fountain that's in the castle courtyard can be used as a sonic beacon, right? But without that sound, I could not trust my sense of direction after making only a few turns in this maze that was called the toxic maze in the game. Toxic because there was poison gas in there. You needed to get out of there. How do you get out of there fast enough? You need to have a sense of direction. You need to have an idea of where you are and how to get back to the entrance. How do you get back to where you were? How do you get back to that courtyard where the fountain was? Well, to navigate the maze and return to the fountain, I could turn towards the watery sound of the fountain. And while inside the toxic maze, I learned how to associate visual details in that environment, the maze environment, with my orientation at each choice point. So sometimes turning to take myself away from the fountain, putting it briefly behind me instead of facing it. So until I reached the appropriate point to turn around and head back towards the fountain again. Is this a trivial point? I don't know. It opened my eyes. So yes, here's the relevant Rike paper back in 2007 on spatial updating. He says visual information is enough, but I say without the sonic beacon that I was listening for. It's back in the early 90s. I had this second person experience of my own failure without that beacon, without hearing the sound. My sense of direction completely failed in this maze while controlling the Mario character, this avatar in front of me. And in that 96 release game called Super Mario 64, it was actually, interestingly, one of the first of the Super Mario series to feature 3D gameplay. But in the castle courtyard, I'm not even sure most people noticed this, but I noticed it right away because I was playing with headphones on. You could hear the watery sound of the fountain in the courtyard outside of the maze. Even when you're inside that toxic maze, you could hear the fountain. And if you turned your head, I'm turning my head to the left and right here. If you turned your head to the right and the sound of the fountain got louder in your right ear, that means it's behind you. But if it got louder in your left ear as you turn to the right, that means the fountain must be in front of you, right? And so by just turning the avatar character left and right and waiting for the coupled change in the spatialized sound, you could tell exactly where that fountain was in a remarkably acute way that included not just left, right, but front, back. So I'm not going to tell you much more about this because I'm really awaiting the collection of data that would support this hypothesis that the auditory beacon is perfectly adequate as a replacement for an imperfect inner compass. So I have to move on from there to what we have done when we actually could use a motion platform to move our seated users. So the rest of my presentation today is actually about using motion simulation, where we're moving the seated users passively. They're not allowed to move themselves. We're moving them passively so that they can experience the vestibular cues, proprioceptive cues, and so forth, to let them know that they've actually been moved. It's another good research question, I think. Just how much does such motion improve a user's spatial orientation, especially if they're actually, though perhaps passively, moved while experiencing some multimodal content? Well, I don't know if you've seen anything like this, someone dragged along behind a car in an easy chair, but in fact, what they're doing in this promotional image is they're showing that if you have a chair with the D-Box branded motion platform installed in it, this is what watching an action adventure film could be like for you. And we have the technology in motion platforms like that. They're in regular use in D-Box enabled movie theaters. They've been in movie theaters for many years. Fortunately, I was able to buy one of those D-Box enabled platforms directly from the company, which is located near Montreal, Quebec, and able to program it to use it as an inexpensive but very practical motion platform for doing the research that I'm going to tell you about. It didn't provide all 6 degrees of freedom, however. You really would like to have one of those military grade motion platforms that gives you all 6. It'll move you up, down, left, right, front, back. That's all the 3 dimensions of linear motion, in effect, translation. But we also have 3 dimensions of angular motion that we can simulate with these motion platforms. For example, you can rotate on the vertical axis and on the axis running front back and on the axis running left right. You rotate on all those dimensions. And I can go into detail about what these things are called, but what's typical of the motion platforms that you see in theaters, like the D-Box platform, is you only got 3 degrees of freedom rather than 6. You have roll, that's used to roll the observer to the left and right. You can pitch them forward and back, pitch them hard enough, perhaps to even dump them on the floor if they're not holding on. Yes. And then also you can heave them up and down the vertical direction. And those are the 3 that the D-Box platform provided us. And that's what I'm going to feature in the experiments that I'm going to tell you about today. There are lots of bigger platforms that have more degrees of freedom. Some are 6, some are 4. But the question is, what about whole body movement and navigation? And what can we find out by doing research about this using such platforms? Well, I'm going to present the results of a study completed with the D-Box platform that was in collaboration with Professor Sakamoto and Suzuki of Tohoku University. This is the reference to that. It's presented back in 2008. Actually, Professor Sakamoto is the one who introduced me to Bernhard Rieke back in 2008. Anyways, you can compare the results that we've got here with those from Rieke, moving through virtual reality without moving again. I've shown that before, but I'm going to focus just on this one study for now because I have just enough time to do that. And I hope that you'll find this one interesting because there is some interesting evidence here about how you can be influenced to perceive vection, it's called, or self-motion in a virtual acoustic space by the addition of whole body motion over which we have control because you're sitting on a chair that's mounted on a motion platform. So we're talking about an augmented reality system here that basically is just superposing motion on the seat that you're sitting in. If you chose to move in the seat, it would be summed with the motion that is being implemented or controlled for you. So it's a superposition problem. I don't need to go on to what we're really up to here is simulating as many different dimensions as we can. And this dates back to Mort Heilig's Sensorama proposal back in 1961 called Reality for a nickel. Maybe you're already familiar with that, but what you may not be familiar with is this quote that I really love to bring into this context. When Brenda Laurel talks about VR, she talks about you always take your body with you. So audiovisual displays can only take us so far into the virtual worlds we create. Here's the quote finally from Brenda Laurel. When we enter a virtual world, we bring our bodies with us. Published back in '93. So what do we do this for mainly? Well, multimodal displays that include whole body motion can support presence, telepresence, but the perception of being somewhere, the sense of presence is strong if you're moving through that place. And of course, for today, I'd also like to say that multimodal displays, including whole body motion, can potentially disambiguate otherwise confusing sensory cues for spatial navigation. So, what is the influence of whole body motion on perceived self-motion? Many have studied it, but what I want to do is compare the relative influence of auditory cues to whole body motion cues. So we're going to deliver acceleration-based cues, which we deliver through the platform that supports the whole weight of the user. So that's why we call it whole body motion. We're not vibrating the seat of their pants here. This isn't a vibration situation. This is a full-on motion of the whole body. And we find that that whole body motion is actually one of the strongest cues for creating, or the likelihood of creating and experiencing self-motion. So what's the ambiguous percept to focus on? Not precept, but percept. Reproduction of moving sound stimuli can be perceived as resulting from either a sound source motion or from self-motion. So if when you hear a sound flying by your head, you're not sure whether it's moving or you're moving, you might be looking for cues from another sensory modality that would tell you whether it was the sound moving past you in a stationary spot or whether you were moving past a stationary sound source so that you're the one flying through space. That's what the whole body motion aids in resolving. It's that ambiguity. Connection here is that immersion and presence in multimodal display may support a shift towards perceived self-motion. I think we've shown that pretty clearly in this research. I'll show you what the laboratory looked like. This is actually from McGill University's Immersive Presence Lab, which is within the research center there called Kermit. And it was a 24-channel spherical loudspeaker array with a tiny little screen in front. And that wasn't a problem for us because we were only looking at interaction between auditory cues and the motion cues, and we weren't presenting much on the screen. In fact, the screen was the interface for collecting responses for the 2 alternative force choice tasks that we presented. So there's on the floor, you probably can't see it very well until I highlight it in red. There you have the motion platform. It's mounted below the floor so that you don't see it when you sit there on a chair, but it's moving you pretty well. So how do we control the observer motion? The motion simulator from D-Box Technology, it was called the Odyssey. It gives those 3 degrees of freedom I mentioned, roll, pitch, and heave. In fact, we only tested the modulation to make sure that it was all working exactly to spec on pitch. And the reason we did that for this study is because we only featured a pitch motion here, and we didn't roll or heave the users for this particular. There was a background heave modulation that was completely uncorrelated that just kind of created a sense of being a little bit free floating in space. To keep this within human ranges where you like what you might experience if you push the accelerator down in a car, the acceleration was constrained to 1.3 meters per second squared. And this is what the box looked like. This was just a rack mounted box in the back of the lab. And you might wonder, how did you get that to all to work in synchrony with the audio? Well, we actually just wrote our own little pure data player for a mixed modal presentation that had 8-channel audio. And in addition to the 8-channel audio, we had 3 channels of, in effect, waveform data that could go out to the motion controller and then the platform. As I said, in the study, we only used pitch, but the 8-channel audio signal could drive 5 audio channels, and then 3 motion platform channels, the 3 degrees of freedom of 4 motion. So the question was really about synchrony in multimodal reproduction. And it's accepted that multimodal sensory integration in audiovisual display requires synchronization, but this hasn't been so closely examined for the bimodal display employed in this study, in which stimuli were presented to the listener via just audio with a multi-channel loudspeaker array and just the motion platform for whole body motion. But this is an important question concerning the range of intermodal delays that will be tolerated in a multimodal display, and over which subjective synchronization between sound and whole body motion will still be reported. So this is actually quite important because we've got these well enough coordinated that it wasn't a problem for us, but if you didn't coordinate them well, you might be outside of the range that humans tolerate for experiencing synchronicity or synchrony in the 2 modalities. So what's the approach taken in this study? The general research question was, how well synchronized must the auditory and motion-based cues be in time in order to create an experience of self-motion, and over what range of sound sort velocities? Maybe if the sound sources move too quickly, you won't experience yourself moving that quickly. So maybe it's only working well when the sound source velocity is flying by you at a slower rate. So what was the observer's task? It's just a time order judgment. That's one of the easiest ones people do in these multimodal studies. What came first? Did the peak in the whole body motion occur earlier or later in time than the point at which the sound sources flew by you? So what type of stimuli do we present? We had 2 8-second violin notes that started in front of you and flew by you. And they were the sources. They're processed in a manner consistent with self-motion past the listening position. Of course, it's completely ambiguous whether it's the sound sources that are moving towards you or you moving towards the sound sources. However, the point in time at which these 2 sound sources moved past you was punctuated by 2 strong cues, a peak in SPL and the Doppler shift, but the platform also reached its peak in the controlled movement of the listener at nearly the same point in time. Of course, it's the nearly the same point that is important to note here, because we could control whether it's a little bit earlier or a little bit later. So here's what the velocities looked like, the simulated velocities for the sound source were the 3 blue curves shown here, flying by you over an 8-second period. But at time 0, right in the middle of this window, when the sound sources fly by you, there's also a peak displacement of the motion platform. There's a little bit of an anticipation, moving you a little bit forward, pitching you a little bit forward just before you reach the pick when you get kicked backwards in your seat. And when you get kicked backwards in your seat, that's consistent with having punched the accelerator in your car and feeling the acceleration of the vehicle in a forward direction. Not very rapid. The pivot angle is not a large angle of pivot here. When you're pitching forward, it's only 1 degree, but it's forceful enough for you to experience it as an acceleration in the forward direction. And as I said, the intermodal delay is what we adjusted. If it was a negative time on this axis, it was platform earlier. The positive is platform later. And the multi-channel loudspeaker system we used, it's the conventional 5.1 channel system, but elaborated to be full range because it had 5 low frequency drivers as well. But the azimuth angles are the conventional ones for a multi-channel, a 5-channel sound system in home theaters. But this is what the room was like that we simulated, so that when the sounds moved from the position of the speakers, either towards you or you towards them, which, as I said, is ambiguous strictly in terms of the sound. There was also this Doppler shift and peak in the SPL, how loud the sound got at the peak, but also there was a simulation of room reflections so that it really sounded like the sounds were moving in the distance as well. The experimental method was a 2 alternative force choice, temporal order judgment, and the psychometric measures that we use are the point of subjective simultaneity, I'll call PSS, which is the point at which reports of earlier and later are equally probable. And the IQR, the interquartile range, just shows how much variability there was around that point of subjective simultaneity. So the question, will these values depend on the peak velocity of the sound source? That's one of the experimental questions. So let's start with the slowest of the three tested sounds. There's the platform lag in milliseconds on the x-axis, but what's on the y-axis here is the proportion of the time between 0 and 1 when someone is saying that the platform moved later than the sound source. In other words, the sound source passed by you either earlier or later than the platform. So when the platform's later, it means the sound passed by you first, before you felt the kick of acceleration. You fit a psychometric function to that, and you get that sort of curve that for one individual in this case. But if you then, that's the slowest velocity, but if we run at the higher velocity of 4.5 meters per second, almost twice as fast, a moderate velocity, you can see the point of subjective simultaneity is shifting back towards the 0 millisecond point. And when it's really fast, oh my gosh, it's shifted in the opposite direction. So the fastest velocity, the point of subjective simultaneity actually shifted quite a bit. So here we've combined all that data into a single plot. And you see that the PSS is certainly influenced by simulated velocity. So the summary is the calculated PSF values shifted as a function of the velocities 2.4, 4.5, and 6.8 meters per second. And as these three sound source peak velocities were experienced, the calculated PSS values for this one observer that I showed was minus 135 milliseconds up to plus 34 milliseconds. Similar data was obtained from 5 additional observers to get this summary graph, and that's the end of this presentation about this data anyways, but I think it's interesting enough to show, and I hope you find it interesting too, not only do you have this shift in the point of subjective simultaneity across the entire group, where it's not as great a shift in the tolerable platform time lag when it's at the slowest rates, but that the line that's drawn through it, these points horizontally, is actually the interquartile range for the temporal order judgment. So it actually shows us quite a bit of variability in the PSS at the slowest rate. So sound source peak velocity increased, both the IQR and the PSS values decreased. Conclusions: the calculated PSS values shift towards 0 objective intermodal delay as the peak velocities of the sound source increase. And asynchrony between the peak sound source velocity and peak observer movements is more easily discriminated at the higher sound source velocities. Sensory integration of whole body motion and sound source motion may depend on the temporal order of the peak velocity in these two modalities. So for the best results, the observer should be moved before the flyby of the sound source. In other words, you got to make them think they're moving first and then let the sound fly by them. So I want to stop soon, but I want to let you know about a couple of applications. Incorporating motion platform is potentially useful for any immersive display system that intends to transport the observer into a virtual world. But the greatest benefit is probably to be found when the observer is taken for a ride through the virtual world rather than given active control. So first I'll introduce a scientific application, and then out of respect for the previous presentation, I'd like to also say there are probably musical applications for this too. In fact, I'd like to end with one. So a scientific application would be in scientific visualization. Accompanied by sonification, you allow an observer to travel through an abstract space in which data has been rendered. It could enable superior exploratory data analysis by moving through the data as if you're in the space of the data. And by creating the sense of motion, it's not the data flying by you, you're actually in the world of the data itself. So knowing where one is in that abstract data space and how one is traveling through it, that's why we need to have some sensory orientation, some spatial orientation cues. So when you have that, it could potentially reduce the cognitive load, allowing observers to pay more attention to the data itself, rather than requiring them to cognize the path through the space, which they normally would have to do if the sensory mode integration wasn't creating such a gripping experience of spatial orientation. And we can also imagine enhanced architectural walkthroughs. This is a no-brainer. Everybody knows you'll probably want to do that. But moving right along, an artistic musical application. I really love this one because back in 2008, I invited a computer music composer to try to create a piece of music with this technology that relies on the perception of moving through the field of sound that is spatialized all around you. So creative exploration and musical sound spatialization, it's a goal that's often focusing on moving sound source motion about fixed listeners. So why not try the opposite? With the optimized intermodal display, the composer can effectively move listeners through an environment populated with stationary sound sources. For example, our colleague at the School of Music at Northwestern University, although he's left Northwestern University long ago, oh gosh, almost 20 years ago now, almost, Gary Kendall composed a piece of music based on this geometric model called the 5-leaf rose. And in that piece of music, the listener was traveling along the petals of this 5-leaf rose. So imagine taking this arrow, the listener moves along, and with a motion platform, you can bank and pitch, roll and pitch the user, even him if need be, in order to create a strong sense of motion through that space. And so for the first time ever, you can really be fairly confident that your listeners are going to experience the piece as intended, where the listener is actually moving through the spatialized sounds, heard as if they are stable positions, and only the listener is moving through them. So guess what? That's it. That's my whole presentation for today. And I don't really much more unless you want me to. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you if you have any questions, and I'll thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Bill. And thank you for Mary observations, putting it together with research in the past and the future, as well as other presenters at this session. Are there any questions from the audience?
I'll try.
May I?
Evgeny, please go ahead.
I have a couple of questions. So first, after your experiments, do you believe that the sense of direction can be somehow trained and improved, depending on?
That's a good question. In fact, I do intend to address that, and I'm not sure I have a really good answer for you yet, because I haven't succeeded in training it in a spatial navigation task that gave me hard data. I haven't got hard data on that to answer you with the way the scientist would, which would be via experimental evidence where I've controlled all the factors. But as an exercise in designing interesting environments in which you can give people control over elements that could possibly give them access to their own inner compass, I have a good feeling about that. I just don't know how great I'm going to be, because there's so many difficulties involved in these tasks. Actually, this is what Bernhard done very well. He's done lots of experiments where he creates very ambiguous spatial navigation situations that are almost unrealistically difficult, where you can't really tell where you are visually at all, which is not typically the way you design spaces for games. You're not trying to disorient people most of the time, but he's done that, and he's shown that he can create a more proper sense of direction. So I say he's the one to look at for the evidence, and I hope to be engaged with that research issue myself in the next few years.
Do you think that the characteristics or kind of values that you measured during your experiments maybe function from the type of acoustic signal you use? So you said that you used a violin voice from the speakers. Could it be that different types of sound may have different acoustic characteristics affecting the measurements?
Well,
over?
yeah, of course, when I hear a question like that, I typically hear the question, oh, do you think you can generalize your results to other kinds of sound? And I don't know if I can generalize yet, and yet I'm happy to go out on a limb for you and say that I think we could use other sounds, but I also think that other sounds are going to be more difficult to use. I think with a lot of aperiodicity. I think you know what I mean. When I say, violins, they're not strictly periodic. They have aperiodicity. And so over time, they give you a lot of rich variation from period to period that really engages the auditory spatial imagery in a much more successful way than just a drum beat might, a drum hit, or for that matter, just a single attack on a piano. Although the piano due to the inharmonicity in the stretched strings, it does have some nice texture, but the violin is like giving continuous variation that the auditory spatial awareness loves to latch onto. And it's why we chose the violin in this case. In fact, it was my violin played with just a little bit of vibrato to really capitalize on the aperiodicity. But for that matter, you can imagine someone with a more practical application might be talking about, well, can we use navigational aids that are more like what you would hear in your car, right? That's a more reasonable thing to think about. And I'm not interested in putting this in someone's car necessarily. I'm actually interested in having people enjoy a seated VR or a seated XR experience when they're not moving through space. And that's where I focused all my attention so far. Of course, people do want to give you better spatial orientation in your car. Where they've a lot more effort into the research in this area is in your spatial orientation while you're flying a plane. In fact, the whole idea of an attitude indicator on a plane, that you see this line in front of you that you're just supposed to keep level to know. There's about 3 or 4 patents on providing an auditory attitude indicator, which would be 2 sounds that either side of you that let you know that your attitude is varying, so you don't have to watch the instruments so closely visually unless you look outside the plane. I don't know if a small plane, but one of the first things they do for you is they teach you that you shouldn't really trust your eyes and you shouldn't really trust the instruments either. You have to be really very conscious all the time of where you are in a plane, because the centripetal force can really fool you into thinking that the gravity well is going that way when actually it's going that way. So you can get oriented your plane really well. So you need attitude, you also need pitching. So
I see. I never had such an experience. That's but I can understand.
yeah. Questions? Yeah. Do I say your name right? Is it Evgeny?
Yes.
Oh, it is Evgeny. Okay.
Evgeny. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, well, we can follow up later. Thank you. Michael, are you unmuting yourself?
Yeah, I am. Thank you for question. If there are no other questions, I think we can proceed directly to Yuka and Rob's segment.
Yeah, I think
Everybody
6
okay
o'clock
with
is a good time for me to quit for sure.
All right, good.
Thanks for listening to me the whole time. I appreciate your attention.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Evgeny, for the question. All right, Rob and Yuka, you guys ready?
Yes, we are.
I'm letting go
Yep,
the screen. The
Yes,
screen
we
is
are ready.
yours.
Okay, thank you.
Yuka and Rob are with YR Design, and the title of their, and they're going to talk about their contribution to the Hyperwiper project, currently taken by myself with Julian and Camillo and Peter. Thanks, Yuka and Rob.
And it fits well in the other presentations, I think, the relation between our spatial environment and our sensors would pick up in the car. So let's start. Let me get you share the screen. There we go. Good. Welcome. This is the 3rd episode of Hyperwiper. I'm Rob.
I'm Yuka.
And we are from YR Design. And we are presenting from the mountains in Nara. And we have another important teacher. She is our manager today. and civil supervisors. The project has been renamed and it's currently called HyperWiper.
HyperWiper sounds exciting. In 2014 and 2015, we introduced dancing wipers, and HyperWiper is upgraded version of dancing wipers. By the way, when it got renamed, wipers became wiper. Are there any reasons why the project name became singular? Do you know?
No idea.
Okay, but still, without knowing the reason why the name became singular, we could work on this project. So we consider this as a minor issue, right?
Yes, very right.
If we want to know the real reasons, you have to ask Professor Michael Cohen, who started this project and gave us a chance to work on this project with him and his team. It doesn't sound so professional to repeat same explanation, but we cannot expect anybody to remember presentation which we delivered 6 years before, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. And today we have probably a lot of other people I saw in the chat, that about maybe 28 people who never seen this project from Michael.
So some of you might think our presentation is not completely fresh, but I hope you all will enjoy with us today. So let's start. What is HyperWiper?
HyperWiper of car, which moves in the beat of the audio music.
Project name got changed. Still the same. Today, we will process to make dance. Secondly, what we have done in the end, next steps in the development.
And afterwards, if people are interested, we can ask questions and we can reply in the chat and other things. Before,
and then, would you mind changing
change slide? I changed the slide. Good.
Thank you. Before we introduce the development process, I think we should warm up a little bit so everybody can follow our presentation better. Let's think simple. Windshield wiper moves with the beat of car audio music. What does it mean mechanically?
It means the timing of the wiper starting to move should be controlled. That's simple. Huh?
Regarding ordinary, which part is controlling the timing? Can we say wiper switch on the multifunction level timing?
Yes, we can. You switch it on. If it doesn't rain, you switch it off. And if you want to synchronize with the beat of the audio, on, off, on, off, on, off, 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 off. But that's too dangerous. Don't do that. And it can cause accidents. We don't want to be responsible for that. That's why the HyperWiper comes in.
And the wiper switch manipulates which part of a car?
The wiper motor.
What is the function of the wiper motor normally?
Normally, the wiper motor moves the part of the wiper system through the gears in the housing. And when you turn off the wiper, the park run switch in the motor housing gets activated and lets the wiper blade stop at the rest position.
Wiper system includes a motor, so can we expect it has a fuse too?
Yes, of course. In case it's short out, it doesn't burn a wire, so it doesn't make a fire. It's not in the wiper motor. The fuse is in a box. As you can see here, this is Peter's car, and the box is, and the fuse is very nice labeled.
Wiper system is technically and not a simple system, so can we suspect it uses PCB, printed circuit board?
Yes, that's correct. Commonly, people call it a wiper control module or a wiper pulse module.
Now you all got some idea about the windshield wiper system. So we will introduce you steps which we made for the HyperWiper development. Starting from hardware, what is necessary for making wipers dance?
You need to install the hyperwiper module, a magnetic switch, and a magnet, and replace a fuse with a fusible, controllable fuse. And of course, you need an audio source.
How about the wiper control module and park-run switch of original car wiper system?
We keep them the way they are. Only when the users want to use the hyperwiper, the hyperwiper system bypasses the original car wiper system, and instead it uses the wiper module and magnetic switch.
How about the software? Would you mind changing the
Yeah, I can change the slide. Yeah.
Thank you. What is necessary for making wipers dance?
We have to detect the wiper position. Secondly, we have to detect the audio beat. And this is part done by the other team members. So we will not explain that in detail in this presentation. And thirdly, we have to control the wiper motor. And then fourth, we have to link everything together. And fifth is we should troubleshoot everything if everything works as intended.
Currently, we are developing hardware and software only on Teensy platform. So we are always using magnifying glasses.
Magnifying glasses? I never work with magnifying glasses, only when you have to sort of very tiny things. But for Teensy, surely you don't need any magnifying glasses. The processor is called Teensy. It's in the hyperwiper module.
Teensy does a lot in a hyperwiper module.
Indeed, Teensy is always busy in a hyperwiper module. Most of the software work is done by Teensy. The only software not done in the Teensy is the analyzing processing of the audio. This is done with the Teensy, the audio Teensy board. This one you can see in the Sumo.
The upper part, right?
Yeah, the upper part.
And then bottom part is
And
Teensy,
the
right?
bottom part here, you can see here in this part, is the Teensy.
The Teensy, tiny Teensy.
Tiny Teensy.
Okay. Hardware-wise, current version is not so much different from 2015 version. Should we be happy about it?
Yes, similar. It looks similar to the 2015 versions, but a lot of small changes too. It got improved. We built a few units and tested it in other cars, and new boards are on the way. Or they already made. These ones are the new boards, and they will be populated soon, and we can replace the prototype boards. And the material of the enclosure can handle -20 to 60 degrees Celsius. Wow, I sound like a salesman. Buy the hyperwiper, buy the hyperwiper.
Then the enclosure is stylish now?
I think so, much better. Yeah.
Can you install and remove easily?
Yes, very easy in installing, very easy to take out. So
sounds great. If you are following our presentations passionately, it must be too easy to say which part of hardware works as a sensor of windshield wiper position detector, right?
That's very easy. That's the magnetic switch.
That's too easy question. Where do we mount it?
Inside of the window?
Really?
Yeah.
So inside the rear window too?
Oh, no, not yet. Maybe in the future versions, but not in this version.
Where is the magnetic switch on the magnetic switch?
Of course, on the wiper blade. Otherwise, it would never work.
No doubt about it. We call it wiper position detector, but basically, what we need to know with this are two timings. Can you tell?
Yes, I can tell that. One timing is when the wiper blade leaves the rest position, and another one is when the wiper blade returns to the rest position.
So if that is the case, some of car models do not meet this design, right? Like if the wiper blade rest position is not visible from driver and passenger's seat, it means magnet on the wiper blade holder cannot activate magnetic switch when it is at the rest position.
Yeah, that's true.
Is this unfortunate?
No. We have other solutions for that. We have two options for these cars. One is to make a small stand and put the magnet on that, so it reaches the magnetic switch. So the magnet reaches the magnetic switch. And another way is to just adjust the wipers. So take them off and readjust them that they in resting position, they will touch the magnetic switch. And we are even looking for another solution, but that we can talk about later.
Really?
Oh, we can do it now already. Good. So
this one, right?
Yeah.
If that is the case, no, I mean that the would you change the
okay, good. This one.
And then
Yeah, it's a software solution you're talking about.
okay, the next one?
This one? No,
Ah,
it's correct.
okay. So you're gonna talk about the software solution then.
Yes, right. We can talk about it.
If you want to overcome this design problem with the software development, what do we need?
We need to know the time when the time difference between the start of the motor and the first time the wiper passes the magnetic switch.
Also,
we need to know the time between the first and second wiper passes the magnetic switch. The same time means the way to return to the rest position. So to do that, we let the hyper wiper at the startup start the windshield wiper motor for making one test wipe and let it calculate the time.
That's smart.
You think so? I'm not sure about that.
By the way, where does the magnetic switch send its signal to?
It sends the signal to a pin on the teensy, a very tiny pin. I would even call it a pinsy, not a teensy.
Really?
A pinsy.
So you need magnifying glass.
yes. I think you need to magnify the glass there.
Why does teensy need to get the signals from a magnetic switch?
To synchronize the wiper movement from with the beats.
Are you sure the wiper synchronized with the beats without any delay?
Oops, that's a good question. Yeah, I think we can. Yeah, we can do that. The problem is that the teens for processing the data. Considering that, we adjust the timing for the delay. Otherwise, it's not a hyperwiper. Again, the salesman comes in. Currently, we are in the testing phase, so we're using potentiometer to figure out the exact value of the delay in reality.
Anyway, we understand that wiper motor controlling software uses the information from a magnetic switch, and we can simulate how the software works with the cars whose wiper blade rest position is visible from driver and passenger's seats. If the beat comes from an audio source, how does the signal reach motor?
The first you will have the signal go to the audio board, then it goes to the teensy. Then if the wiper is in the rest position, the teensy switches on the motor.
How about the beat comes when the wiper is above magnetic switch?
At this point, we ignore the audio signal and it doesn't influence the motor at all.
Once the motor is switched on, always on?
No, it's not always on. If the wiper returns to the rest position and activate the magnetic switch, the motor will be switched off and wait for the next beat.
We have been simulating cases with wipers visible when at rest position, but does this software work fine for the cars with wipers hidden when at rest position?
Yes, if the hardware is adjusted, as we shown in the previous slide, it will work fine.
Can we solve a design issue with the software?
Sure. The software can measure the time difference between the moment Tinci switches on the motor and the time the magnet on the wiper blades activate the magnetic switch.
Happy to hear that. What will happen if no beat is detected?
Again, a good question. The Tinci let the wiper makes 10 wipes in a minute.
Why 10 wipes in a minute?
Because we want to use the hyper wiper legally. We want to drive around in the rain and then see the wipers come with the beat for the audio. But we have to follow the minimum sweeping cycle requirements in Japan. And that is 10 wipes in a minute.
Talking about the legal issue, do we need to consider anything else for developing a hyper wiper?
No, I don't think so. According to the law, the windshield wiper structure should be the same as the original. The law doesn't mention anything about electronics. Probably the law is quite old in Japan.
But still good.
Yeah. Back to the software development.
Can I talk?
Yes, you can talk.
Each software is developed separately, so we need software to link them together.
Yeah, it's called the hyperwiper logic. Look at the diagram.
Very impressive.
Oh, hold on. That doesn't work like that.
Very impressive.
You think so? Oh, something went wrong here. This is the wrong slide. But anyway, we have in the beginning, sorry, the slide doesn't show the way it should show. But let me get that quickly. Hold on. Let me temporarily put it in. Then we can see that better. Oh. Sorry all for the miscommunication. Let me get that. No, the picture doesn't show. Sorry. Here we should be able to do that too. Somewhere here. Yeah, we have to go in there. Hold on a second.
33?
33. No, that's wrong. Okay, good. We cannot show that part, but the details. Hold on, let me check that.
But you can continue without showing the detail, right?
Yeah, it's nicer if you, okay, anyway.
I understand,
yes.
But
okay, so we can do that with the just talking. The different blocks are connected. So first of all, how to use it, that's important. First, you switch on the multifunctional level, the normal, well, hold on, let me share my screen, at least we can see something. Good.
The impressive dignity.
Yeah, it didn't work. This time, you could nicely zoom in, but this time it didn't work. So anyway, to start the hyperwiper system, you switch the wiper on. The system is normally in a car. Switch on the hyperwiper module and turn on the music. Then, if in a green block, you cannot see that correctly in this presentation, but the music goes to the audio speakers and goes to the TNC input. And then the green part is the beat detection. From the beat detection, we have another part, it's yellow. I think you cannot see that too in the slides correctly. But the yellow part is the part where the time is detected. And
yellow part, it's difficult to see the difference, but that is in the middle of
yeah, let me show that here. So maybe it's easier to show here. Hold on a second. Wrong. This part is the timing part. And then if we have this whole area is the motor control area. And we have another small part here that we talk about that later.
Cannot wait.
Another time. Yeah, that's up to you.
There was a part of troubleshooting in the slide of overview, but we haven't talked about it.
Right. We need to develop software that can test the functionality of wiper precision, windshield wiper motor.
Windshield wiper position detector.
Detector, so that's it. And the windshield wiper motor control and the audio input. Talking about audio input, we are planning also to include the Bluetooth connection for the future And also, we should be able to control the speed of the wiper more dynamically, slowing down and speeding up the speed of the wipes. Of course, we should use hardware in the high and low conditions and high humidity. If you want to know more about the project, you can check out the GitHub link. And
if you are interested in watching the working model, we have a link too. It is 2015 still year how it works at drive, because not only we consider safety, usability, and legitimacy, but we have our passion, motivation, and ambition to improve. So it takes time for the project.
But we're making progress. Please keep about the hypervisor, and thanks for attending. And thanks for the team of the Hyperviper for getting this going.
Thank you, Yuka and Rob, and indirectly Kitty-chan. That was a great complimentary presentation. You guys are good, good together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If there are any questions, we got a couple minutes. Okay, thank you. I'm safe. Okay, good. So thank you. So this brings us to the final presentation and keynote session presented by Jens Herder of Hochschule Düsseldorf. Jens, are you there now? Jens is going to do some complicated multimedia stuff, so we might have to jiggle with the network a little bit while he's presenting. Jens, you okay? We can't hear you, and you haven't started sharing the screen yet. Maybe Jens stepped away from his computer. His keynote wasn't actually scheduled to start until 1640, about 15 minutes from now. I propose that we take a 15-minute break and reconvene at 4:40 p.m. To Jugo Fun Matamarimashi. Yo. Yeah, so Jugo Fun QK Torimashio, and let's come back here at 4:40 to enjoy the final keynote presentation. Everybody okay on that? Oh, there you are. Jens, do you want to start now, or would you rather wait 15 minutes? Jens has posted to the chat stream that he's present, but he has to turn on the sound. So sorry for.
You hear something?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
You hear me now?
Yeah, we can
hear you.
Okay,
you hear me.
I can hear you.
Without echo. Okay. Michael, please spotlight my video because the slides are part of the video.
So I'm not the
You're
host.
the host.
I don't have any privileged capability.
You're not the host.
Right.
Oh, that's bad.
But,
I thought you were the host.
Debo is the host, and he's online. He can probably service whatever request you have.
Yeah. So take my video and make it spotlight. Put a spotlight on it. Okay, that works. So you can see my slide, okay?
Yeah, we can see your slide.
Okay. During my presentation, maybe 2 students will join, but because I told them a little bit later, so they might be not here in time. So let's see how that works out. Okay. So my title is Mixed Reality for Education and Art. And I will talk how to use this for Japanese language learning and about an art installation which happened in Nagasaki. And also, usually when I join this conference, I use my virtual TV studio to make a fancy presentation, but I can't do it now, so I'm in my home office and sitting on tatami. And now I would like to do it fancy again, but let's say with, just simple tools. I'm using my hardware here to give you this presentation. So let's start with augmented reality. Camera, can you type this conference? Do you see the conference? ISSM 20. We just added graphics into my space, and I will try to continue that through the whole presentation. Okay, here you see the Earth, and we want to know where Japan is, and there's Japan, and where's Aizu, where Michael now is sitting. So we are getting a little bit closer, and there's a Japanese flag, and there should be Aizu some there. But we have some time difference. You all experience, you're not all in Japan, so let's move out a little bit. And here we have Germany. Do you see already Germany? Let's put a flag in there. Somewhere there is Düsseldorf, so my presentation is there, and the sun tries to go up, so it's quite early here. So I'm using augmented reality here, but in the past I did my presentation out of the virtual TV studio where I have a green screen, and the green screen is keyed out, and then I could add my presentation there. And I remember I did once a presentation with Professor Ano, and said I have a nice view out of the window, and the window wasn't real. It was just a video texture with a nice view of the River Rhine. So all presentations are with slides. So I prepared a slide here on a small monitor. Can you see that monitor? Oh, it's too small. The nice thing about augmented reality is you have control about the graphic. So let's make the monitor a little bit larger. How about that? Yeah, you can't read it. So let's make it even a bit larger. So now you could read my first slide, which is the title slide. Okay, so I continue using that. And everything is becoming weird because of the coronavirus. But again, the nice thing about augmented reality is you can take out something from your slides. Yeah, like this one. Oh, isn't that huge? The coronavirus. Have you seen it so close by me? when I'm in the TV studio, I usually have a lot of students helping me with the presentation, but now they can't help me, so I'm in the home office. And but augmented reality and out-of-the-box tools help me to. Okay, so now I'm starting with my first presentation, and here we have the mixed reality continuum from Milgram, but it's not the Milgram which we know we see psychology experiments. It's about categorizing AR and VR. So maybe now 3D isn't the right thing for looking at the presentation. So I'm switching to 2D, and wait, I have to switch my slide. Here is the Milgram mixed reality continuum. And here's some stuff which will be part of my presentation in this continuum. So usually I'm using augmented virtual reality to present something. So the graphics are around and a little bit real if they are like the presenter. And what is nowadays more common is that we use augmented reality, that we have the real environment and add some graphics to it. Yeah. So at the beginning, or in the beginning, my cooperation with Shinpei Takeda. He's an artist who lives in Düsseldorf, also in Mexico, and originally from Japan. And he contacted me and he wanted to know how to work in VR. And as you see him now, he's doing a sculpture within a video presentation. He's also drawing the sculpture, and we recorded it. So it was a kind of happening of 20 minutes. And we want to preserve this kind of happening. And one way is to use a video recording. And the other way is to print out what he has done in 3D, or use AR later on, and you will see that. Okay, so next slide. This was a reassemblance of his installation Alpha DK7 to erase memories in 2012 he did in Beijing in China. And let me tell you a little bit about his background. So he did interviews of survivors of the atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that influenced him a lot. And he started to look at the voice pattern, like you're looking at audio in a computer. But then he used just paint, and we're drawing those voice patterns on paper, on ground, on everything. So he did many different kind of installation like that. And he wanted to have it also authentic, in that the drawing really corresponds to the voice. So he even printed the time code at his drawings. So that's the story behind that production. And then we looked at the Erinnerungsort at the library at the University of Applied Sciences in Düsseldorf. And we wonder how to access this memory. And again, we used augmented virtual reality. And what did we have? Yeah, we had voice patterns you see at the ground. and also images, pictures, photos from the past. One big question is how to access and visualize archives and memories without just browsing through books. So we use our studio as a prototyping tool for experimenting, accessing those memories. Okay. Yeah, I'm switching here in between. And 2 years ago, we started to prepare an installation of him in Nagasaki for the anniversary of the atomic bomb. I guess was it 75 years ago? Oh, yeah, it's already a long time ago. So not many survivors are alive. So the question is how to access it, and a big question is how to make these art installation. And we had to convince, or he had to convince people in Nagasaki from the city, yes, my installation is suitable for that space. So we did a video presentation like we do now with Nagasaki, and my students and I, we were in Düsseldorf. We didn't go to Nagasaki, but we wanted to present everything. So he did a panoramic image for us. He was in Nagasaki. So it's 360 images, and we put it into our studio as a background. So the nice thing about the 360 is you could move with the camera when you are in the center. And then we used a tilt brush to draw in that environment to show us or to show what we want to do with that space. I mean, the real space, the park in Nagasaki. And somehow my presentation is not transition. And okay. Okay. No. Ah, yeah. Okay, here. And we had a nice, interesting part. We wanted to show how to use augmented reality in the park in Nagasaki, but we were in Germany, so we could show it. So I had here an app, it's Jigspace, by the way, the same app which I'm also using now for presenting you these slides. And as you see here, I show these the structure of the atomic bomb, and but within the green screen part. So the green screen green went through the camera of my mobile phone, but then was substituted by the camera of the studio, which recorded me holding the mobile phone, so that the actual in Nagasaki was within that presentation. So we used augmented virtual reality to demonstrate augmented virtual reality. Is that clear? So we were actually at two sides of the mixed reality continuum from Milgram. Okay. So now we are 1 year before the presentation or installation in Nagasaki, and there we used augmented reality to do a pre-visualization of the place. And let me show you the video from it. So what you see here now is computer graphics, we plan to have his drawing on the ground, and it was the first time that he did such a huge drawing around the whole park. And we wondered, could that work out? So we did a pre-visualization for art. Pre-visualization is common if you build a car or something very expensive, but here we did a pre-visualization for art. Okay. I have to continue with my slides a little bit. Okay, let's come to the next slide. Now I show you a video from last year in August, which shows the actual drawings of him. And also we developed an app so that the visitor can appreciate that. Do you hear sound? Oh, no. I wonder if you hear sound.
Yes, we do.
I don't hear the sound. And okay, then I will comment it. So he draw onto the ground these voice audio patterns, and we also draw some markers on it under our guidance with numbers on it. And we students developed an app which recognized the marker, and then we're playing the sound of the drawn voices from the interviews. And also we showed these kind of flags with images from the past to illustrate the historical place at the moment. And we also put in the sculpture he was created in our studio before. Later you will see. So usually when you go into the park, you don't hear the voices from the past. You don't see anything, but using his paintings and the augmented reality app, you could hear the voices and see images. So the actual places, or behind the actual places, are memories. And the big question is, how do we access those memories? Of course, you could try to recreate it drastically realistic, like the explosion or everything. But then maybe it would hurt the people, or they wouldn't try to access those memories. So in this way, his drawing is an abstraction of that, and makes it maybe easier to access. Let me speed up a little bit the video. And now here you see the markers detected, and his sculpture appears, and you can look into the sky through the virtual sculpture. And the nice thing about AR is you can create something really big, but outside you let's look a little bit. It was a really nice experience for instance, because we didn't print out markers like, you know, from the early days of augmented reality. I mean, he painted that, and then we, in Germany, we had to say, yeah, that's a good painting, or no, it's not a good marker. Then it finally he did in the rain the right markers. And the app we developed works with AR Core and AR Kit, and we had to bring it in the App Store and access it. Convince people to download an app and install it just for visiting and installation. It's a hard thing, and not all people have access to a smartphone which provides AR functionality. So we had also a simple web interface as a fallback for the voices, so that with a simple web browser you could hear the interviews from the past. But then not everyone experienced that, and I wondered how we could do it a little bit better. There we decided, how about trying it out in a browser? I mean, let's do augmented reality in the browser. Maybe everyone of you have already Googled a dog or something, and then looked at dog in augmented reality, and then we thought, oh, maybe we could do the same that. And let me show a video recording of how I use that app. Later on, I will provide you with the links, with the slides and the links, and then you can try out everything by yourself. I just went to a website, and then now you can place at your place the graphics from the past and hear the voices like it was in Nagasaki. But you do it at your place at home. So it's like traveling around and yeah, getting everything around. And maybe that's the nice thing about Corona. It tells us, yeah, we need to use the tools better, so that we have the rich experiences also at home and convey also using video conferencing. Okay, by the way, this sculpture was created in the studio using an HMD, so it was done with tilt brush. Okay. So next slide. So I wonder if Dominic Bernes is in the audience.
Yes.
Dominic, are you here? Then
Yes.
please start your microphone.
Can't you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, okay.
Okay, then I will explain something about her master thesis. She developed an app called Nihongo to Go, and so you're moving around and you want to learn Japanese, and the question is how to do that efficient. One way to learn kanji is you write it on post-its, I mean on some notes, and then you place the notes everywhere, or you have the notes in your pocket and then you look at it. And she tried out to do the thing using augmented reality. So she developed an app where you can place notes in augmented reality outside. So here you see a dog, and then she places a note in front of it and types in a dog, and it will be translated automatically to the kanji, and then she had that, so that she used a web service for that. Also for the kanji were different input methods for entering things, and now she's typing key in hiragana, and then she gets the kanji for key, and she can also enlarge it. And also the nodes are persistent, and they stay in space. So when you go to the same place again, you can access those nodes. I mean, these are the memories. So it's like the voices we had in Nagasaki, but actually the user is creating the content. And also the natural environment in UR is giving the context for learning the language. If you're in a classroom, usually the teacher tries to give the context, tell a story, and then you're learning the language within that story. Yeah. Oh, my battery is running out. Okay. So have persistence memory for those nodes, and who's accessing those nodes I think it's an important feature in, and a big question is sharing those. Currently, those Inu, the dog, is just private, but how about sharing notes in augmented reality with everyone who is at that actually space? So let's say you are at the Tokyo Station train station where millions of people pass through, and everyone is leaving a note, and you could access all those notes. So the metaverse really will become new meaning. Okay. I got power. So here is another bachelor's thesis from Nikolai. I wonder if Nikolai around.
Yes,
so he went into the classroom actually. Into the classroom where you want to enhance the lesson using augmented reality. But also nowadays, you can't, and not everyone can join the classroom. So you want to also have remote participation of it, and that we would like to demonstrate now. Nikolai?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, not Nikolai, are you here?
Yes, I am.
If so, please take over the microphone.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh,
I think it's a problem on Jens's end because he also couldn't hear the previous student.
I see a raised hand.
Yes, yes, but I don't think you can hear me.
Okay, then I will just continue with my presentation. Movie sound is loud. Movie sound, and that understand. Do you mean my voice? You can't hear me?
We can hear you.
Ah, okay, but I stopped my voice. Okay. So everything is fine. Okay. Okay. Kenna Nikolai, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Then I will start the video and you comment it. Okay.
Sure.
So it's running.
Okay, first we see the start screen and the first user enters his name. We connect to the internet and the Photon servers over which the application will run. The actual application is now started. The plane detection by AR Foundation detects areas such as the floor. The table can be then placed on the floor. Then the user can join a so-called photon room in which the user can interact with other users. Now another user enters his name and also starts the application. The user is located in the same place as the other user. He too places his own table in the room and joins the same photon room, as you can see in the video. Okay, now a third user also connects to the Photon servers, this time from a different location. And this user also places the table and joins the same Photon room as the other two users. Here they join to room 763. And the application can be used by 20 users at the same time from all over the world. By clicking the voice button in the upper right corner, the application's voice function is activated and the user is able to communicate with the users via the internet and the application over the voice chat. Okay, the voice button changes to the mute button, and if he clicks on the mute button again, the voice chat is deactivated. Now we jump back to the first user. This person also acts as a teaching person and receives a different user interface than the other users. And by clicking on the next button, the first virtual object is made visible, in this case a person, Hito. And the other users will now see this object on their table as all objects are synchronized over the internet. And the kanji character is displayed above the object so that a connection between the object and the kanji is created through visual learning. The object can be rotated and scaled with the fingers to adjust it to a suitable size. As you can see, it also works for the user who is at a remote location, which is important for restrictions such as those currently occurring because of COVID. By pressing on the kanji button, the kanji character is replaced by a kanji template, and with the template, the user can easily understand the stroke order of the kanji with numbers. And at the same time, the is activated, and it is possible to trace the kanji and memorize it better by that. In addition, the teacher can explain the pronunciation of the kanji via voice chat, and the students are able to repeat it. After 30 seconds, the drawn kanji disappears again in the same order as they were drawn, so that the user can again understand the stroke order of the kanji. And now the teacher can make the object appear in different places, as in the example on the right, Migi. And at the same time, the students can also be asked where the object is to practice the pronunciation of the location information. So the students can now see the object on the right, answer the question, and also trace the kanji. A total of 6 locations can be discussed: right, left, above, below, behind, and in front of. And augmented reality makes information more visible to the user. And here too, the kanji disappears again after 30 seconds. Now the teacher can make the next object appear as in a PowerPoint presentation, in this example a desk. And like in a PowerPoint presentation, the teacher can go back and forth and show different objects. And of course, the other users can also see this desk as soon as the teacher let it appear. And a total of 14 different virtual objects can be discussed by the application, and the 6 location information just mentioned. For example, the dog, Inu. The dog is displayed in front of the second user in the same room, and the location information can be repeated with all 14 objects and memorized very easily by that. And here we can see one more time the drawing of the kanji for in front. My Okay, and after the teacher has discussed all the objects and no more questions are asked, the teacher ends the lesson and the application can be closed using the quit button. And that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have co-located, we are at the same space, and also remote participation. There's some drawbacks in the app I want to mention. One is there's no direct feedback for the kanji. You see the drawing, let's say, as part of the graphics, but the teacher cannot see that. But again, here the context, which was before in augmented reality, the real dog, now you recreating the context using computer graphics at that space. Because when you learn a language, you can't go to all places where the object or the situation happens. That's the reason why you created it at your space. And also all the graphics were hard-coded in the app. So something like an authoring system here is missing for AR content. So this comes to the conclusion of my talk. I showed you augmented virtual reality for video production or showing how to be in VR or for prototyping, pitching and art installation. I showed you augmented reality as an added value for showing hidden features at the memory side. Also, you can get historical memories at home as an intensive experience. And also I showed you how to use augmented reality for creating context for teaching. Yeah. And how about the future? We still have a battle between apps and browsers, and that's really old. So currently, if we want to use all nice features of augmented reality, we need to develop an app, and that's time consuming. So for the app in Nagasaki, we worked 1.5 years. 3 groups of students worked on it. So that was really hard, and also distributing the app wasn't easy. So if we get AR into the browser, everything becomes more simple and more accessible. But that's like the old idea of the virtual reality modeling language, which you might remember from 1996. But still, we are not there. Still, we develop special VR apps to use it with our specific HMD. So I wonder how we can get someday content which is easy to create and easy to distribute. And the next thing what is coming up, we showed you everything with the smartphone, but I believe that HMDs or glasses with AR capabilities will coming out in the near future, and then everything will change, and augmented reality becomes a commodity. And then the big question is, who will be control of the metaverse? Who distributes the content and who has access to the content? And there becomes really important that we get persistent cloud anchors. So like the node which we're outside, that someone else can get access to the node or to the memories. And then everything is about sharing experiences. Okay. Here are my slides with all the links I will share you later. I will give PDF and try out, as you have seen, the AR presentation of what you just have seen. If you have an iOS device, then you could recreate that presentation you have just seen. I use the JIG workspace and a workshop for authoring. It's really easy to use. It's like PowerPoint for AR. For the web stuff, AR, we use the model viewer supporting iOS and Android devices. Here, something about the artist, Shinpei Takeda, and also what we did together. And I also would like to thank all the students who supported this presentation. That's it. Thank you very much. And now I think it's time for questions.
Thank you, Jens. That was very innovative, the way you presented your entire seminar from inside the augmented reality space. I've never seen that before. I was also pleased to see old friends, Dominique and Nikolai, both of whom had been in IZU before. And I'm also glad to see that many of our friends from Karlsruhe have connected to the session too. So maybe we can promote some intra-European collaborations as well. Are there any questions from the audience?
Karlsruhe.
Yeah. Are there any questions? I was wondering about funding. Do you have a grant or something like that from Japan to support Japanese language study?
No. I mean, the students do it by themselves. I mean, they're interested in Japan, and as a preparation, they learn Japanese, and they use it as a motivation for doing their studies.
We hope after the pandemic situation eases that we can resume student exchange. We enjoyed a fruitful partnership with your school, and we had some plans to exchange students with Karlsruhe as well, but those got set aside this past year.
Okay.
Oh, you're hearing the music in the background. Because I unmuted myself, you're hearing the koto performance of my wife, Yuko. You haven't seen either of us in so long. Now you don't know, but Yuko is playing the koto every day now, just practicing her koto.
Oh, that's great.
I can't. I can close the door, but maybe you like to hear the koto.
We enjoy. I would like to meet you again.
Yeah, of course. It's been too long. It's crazy how the world moves on, and we just
Japanese
lose
community.
track. Sorry.
There are also koto concerts.
Mm. Yeah.
So come, visit us, or let's meet in Japan.
Maybe in a year or so that will become possible again. I hope.
Yeah.
So thanks to all the participants in this session, including the lively questions and postings to the chat stream. Thanks especially to our keynote speakers, Jens Yuka and Rob, and indirectly Kitty-chan, Bill Martins, Michael Fishkoff. Thank you for enjoying this session of the ISSM keynote speakers as part of ETLTC. If you're around tomorrow afternoon, I encourage you to, student session will be 4:15 to 5:45 on the same Zoom ID for students from my lab presenting their graduation research themas. If there are any other questions or comments, now's a good time because we're going to finish soon.
Thank you, Michael. You organized everything and you are the motivation.
Thank you all. I wish you a pleasant weekend, and hopefully we got past the American president. We can get past COVID. Ganbarimashou. Cheers. Thank you all.
Thank you, Michael. Gammatte mimashou.
So I will end it now, end the meeting now. But there is a breakout room. You can enjoy the breakout room. I will keep it on for a while, probably another 20-25 minutes. You can be on the breakout room if you need to talk. Any of you interested, you have already been assigned. So you can just enter the room, join the room actually. And then I will keep it open for another 30 minutes or so, and then close it around 5:45 our time in Japan.
And I'll provide the koto music in the background, which is a live performance by my wife here in Sydney, Australia.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, you'd like to hear what the young lady from Aizu Wakamatsu is doing now in Sydney. She's playing the koto.
Very enjoyable.
How do I go into the outbreak room?
You have to join it. You have already been assigned, so I don't think I can do anything.
I joined it.
Yeah. So you should be in the room now.